The whispers started the moment she stepped off the train. Clara Bennett stood alone on the wooden platform, her worn leather boots barely visible beneath the simple calico dress that had once belonged to her mother. The station master avoided her eyes as he handed over her single battered suitcase. In the distance, laughter erupted from a group of well-dressed ladies, their gloved fingers pointing in her direction without any attempt at subtlety. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's her? That's Thomas Fletcher's mail-order bride? One woman exclaimed loudly enough for Clara to hear. Why, she looks like she couldn't afford a proper meal, let alone a wedding dress. Clara's cheeks burned, but she kept her chin high, scanning the faces at the station. Thomas Fletcher was nowhere to be seen. The man whose letters had promised a fresh start, a comfortable home, and a respectable life as the wife of a successful merchant had apparently taken one look at her from afar and decided she wasn't worth meeting. As the station slowly emptied, leaving Clara alone with nothing but her suitcase and fading hope, a man with dirt-streaked clothes and a slight limp approached. His beard was unkempt, his eyes tired but kind. Daniel Wilson had come to town for supplies, not to rescue a stranded bride. But sometimes fate has other plans, especially for those who have nothing left to lose. The winter of 1872 had been particularly cruel to Daniel Wilson. The Sierra Nevada mountains surrounding Pinecrest had seen record snowfall, isolating his small cabin for weeks at a time. Each morning he would rise before dawn, his joints stiff with cold, and prepare a meager breakfast for himself and Ethan, his 8-year-old son. The boy was too thin, his clothes hanging from his small frame like flags on a windless day. But Ethan never complained, not even when the hunger gnawed at his belly, or when the cabin grew so cold their breath fogged the air. Daniel's mining claim at Rushing Creek had shown promise last summer. He'd found enough gold to keep them fed through the fall, but winter had devoured their savings like a ravenous wolf. Now, with spring finally breaking through the frost, he was more desperate than ever to strike a rich vein. "Pa, can I come with you today?" Ethan asked, his eyes bright with hope, as Daniel prepared to head down to the creek. The boy clutched a small wooden figure, a horse that Daniel had carved for him on his last birthday. Daniel sighed, rubbing his bad leg. The mining accident 2 years ago had left him with a permanent limp and constant pain that worsened in cold weather. "Not today, son. The snowmelts made the creek dangerous. You stay here and practice your letters, like I showed you." Disappointment clouded Ethan's face, but he nodded dutifully. "Will we ever have enough gold to build a bigger house, like Mr. Holloway's?" Daniel's jaw tightened at the mention of Victor Holloway, owner of the Holloway Mining Company and the richest man in Pinecrest. The man had been pressuring Daniel to sell his claim for months, offering amounts that seemed generous to outsiders, but that Daniel knew were a fraction of the land's true worth. "We don't need a mansion, Ethan. Just enough to keep us fed and maybe get you some proper schooling." Daniel ruffled his son's hair, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll be back before sundown. Stay close to the cabin." The walk to Rushing Creek took longer than usual, his leg protesting with each step down the muddy path. The claim wasn't much to look at, just a small stretch of the creek with some crude equipment Daniel had cobbled together. But it was his free and clear, inherited from his father, who had come to California with the first wave of 49ers. Daniel worked tirelessly through the morning, shoveling gravel into his sluice box and carefully checking the riffles for any glint of gold. By midday, he had found only a few flakes, not even enough to buy flour for the week. Frustration gnawed at him, threatening to overwhelm the determination that had kept him going since his wife Mary died giving birth to Ethan. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool spring air, and noticed riders approaching his claim. Victor Holloway sat astride a magnificent black stallion, flanked by two of his men. Daniel straightened, ignoring the pain shooting through his leg. "Wilson!" Holloway called out, his voice carrying the confidence of a man unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "I see you're still scratching at this worthless piece of creek like a dog digging for a buried bone." Daniel's hand tightened around his shovel. "This worthless piece is providing for my boy." Holloway laughed, the sound devoid of any real humor. "Is it because, from what I hear in town, your boy's looking mighty thin these days? My offer still stands. $500 for your claim. That's more than generous for a piece of land that's barely yielding dust. And I've told you before, Holloway, this land belonged to my father, and it'll belong to my son after me. It's not for sale." Holloway's smile faded, his eyes hardening. "Pride's a luxury you can't afford, Wilson. Your stubborn attachment to this claim won't feed your boy or fix that leg of yours. Think about it. $500 could give you a fresh start somewhere else, somewhere easier." "We're doing just fine," Daniel replied, though I tasted bitter on his tongue. "Are you? Well, then I suppose you won't be needing any help from the town when the spring floods come through. Word is, it's going to be a bad one this year." Holloway adjusted his hat. "Remember my offer. It won't last forever." Daniel watched them ride away, anxiety coiling in his gut. The spring floods were a real concern. Last year, they'd nearly washed away his equipment. If this year was worse, he could lose everything. With renewed urgency, he returned to his work, sifting through gravel until his hands were raw and the light began to fade. His finds for the day were pitiful, barely worth the effort of carrying them home. Still, he carefully secured the tiny vial of gold dust in his pocket. Every speck counted now. The walk back to the cabin seemed twice as long, his leg throbbing with each step. As he approached, he saw smoke rising from the chimney and felt a moment of panic before remembering. He'd left embers burning that morning. Ethan must have added wood to the fire, a task Daniel had shown him how to do safely. When he pushed open the door, the scene inside stopped him cold. Ethan sat at their small table, a look of guilty surprise on his face. Across from him sat Martha Simmons, the kindly owner of Pinecrest's general store, and a young woman Daniel had never seen before. "Pa!" Ethan jumped up, excitement chasing away his guilt. "Miss Simmons brought us a visitor. This is Miss Clara. She was all alone at the train station and had nowhere to go." Martha rose, her plump face creased with concern. "I'm sorry to intrude, Daniel, but I didn't know what else to do. This poor girl was abandoned by her intended." Thomas Fletcher took one look at her, stepping off the train, and decided she wasn't fancy enough for him. Left her standing there without so much as a word. Daniel's gaze shifted to the young woman. She sat straight-backed and still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her dress was simple and somewhat worn, her brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, but her eyes, clear and intelligent, met his without flinching. "Clara Bennett," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Wilson. Mrs. Simmons insisted I needed somewhere to stay until I can arrange passage back east." Daniel set down his tools, keenly aware of the dirt caking his hands and clothes. "We don't have much to offer, Miss Bennett. As you can see, this cabin barely fits the two of us." "I've explained our situation," Martha interjected, "but there's simply no room at my place above the store, what with my sister and her children visiting. And you know how people gossip in this town. The poor girl can't stay at the boarding house without ruining what's left of her reputation." Clara stood, smoothing her skirt with dignity that seemed at odds with her circumstances. "I won't be a burden, Mr. Wilson. I can cook, clean, and care for your son while you work. Mrs. Simmons tells me you're often gone from dawn till dusk." "Ma, she made us stew, Pa," Ethan said, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "Real stew with meat and everything. Mrs. Simmons brought the ingredients." Daniel looked at the pot hanging over the fire and realized how long it had been since they'd had a proper meal. The aroma made his stomach clench with hunger. Still, he hesitated, another mouth to feed when they could barely manage, as it seemed like madness. It would only be temporary, Clara added, as if sensing his reluctance. Just until I can earn enough for a ticket home. Martha placed a hand on Daniel's arm. Think about it, Daniel. Ethan needs looking after, and you need someone to keep house while you work your claim. Miss Bennett needs shelter and a way to earn her passage. It could be an arrangement that benefits you both. Daniel looked at his son's hopeful face. Then, back at Clara Bennett, with her quiet dignity and determined eyes. Against his better judgment, he nodded. 1 week to start. We'll see how it goes. Relief flooded Clara's features, though she quickly composed herself. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You won't regret your kindness. As Martha prepared to leave, she pulled Daniel aside. That Fletcher is a fool, she whispered. He expected some painted doll to show up, not a woman with calluses on her hands and sensible shoes. But his loss might be your gain, Daniel Wilson. That young woman has a good head on her shoulders, I can tell. After Martha left, an awkward silence filled the small cabin. Clara busied herself serving the stew while Daniel washed up outside, scrubbing mining grit from his skin with cold water that did little to ease the ache in his muscles. When he returned, Ethan was already eating with enthusiasm he hadn't shown in months. Clara waited until Daniel took his seat before serving, herself a modest portion. This is good, Daniel admitted after his first bite. Thank you. It's nothing special, Clara replied, but I've always believed that even simple food can nourish the spirit if prepared with care. As they ate, Ethan peppered Clara with questions about where she came from and why she'd traveled so far to marry someone she'd never met. Clara answered patiently, explaining how her parents had died of fever, leaving her with few options in her small Pennsylvania town. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mr. Fletcher's letters painted such a picture of Pinecrest, she said, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. He described his mercantile business, his fine house on the hill, and how he was seeking a genteel wife to help him entertain important customers. Fletcher likes to put on airs, Daniel said gruffly. His mercantile business is a cramped shop where he overcharges for basic supplies, and that fine house is a 2-room apartment above it. Clara's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. I see. Well, perhaps his rejection was a blessing in disguise. I've never been particularly skilled at being genteel anyway. As Ethan's eyelids began to droop, Daniel showed Clara to the small corner where she would sleep. He'd hung a blanket for privacy, giving her the only chair in the cabin and his own extra blanket. It's not much, he said, embarrassment coloring his voice. It's shelter, Clara replied simply, and that's more than I had this morning. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Later, as Daniel lay on his narrow bed with Ethan curled against him, he stared at the cabin's rough-hewn ceiling and wondered what madness had possessed him to invite a stranger into their home. They could barely feed themselves, let alone another person. And yet, there had been something in Clara Bennett's eyes. Not desperation, as he might have expected, but a quiet determination that resonated with something deep within him. Tomorrow, he decided he would work harder, dig deeper, stay longer at the creek. Something had to give soon. It had to. On the other side of the blanket partition, Clara Bennett sat in the wooden chair, writing by the dim light of a candle stub in a small, leather-bound journal. Her fingers, reddened from years of work, moved steadily across the page. Dear Diary, today did not go as planned. The man whose letters promised comfort and security took one look at me and disappeared. I should have known better than to believe such promises. And yet, I find myself in the home of a man who has nothing to offer but a roof and his trust, and somehow that feels more honest than all of Thomas Fletcher's flowery words. Tomorrow begins my new life in Pinecrest, however temporary it may be. I am determined to make the most of it. Clara closed the journal and tucked it carefully into her suitcase. Outside, an owl hooted softly, and the wind whispered through the pines. She was far from everything familiar, in the home of a stranger in a town that had already rejected her. And yet, for the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. Daniel woke before dawn, his body stiff from another cold night. For a moment, he forgot about their visitor, startling slightly at the sound of quiet movements in the cabin. Clara was already up, stoking the fire and heating water for coffee. "You're up early," he commented, careful not to wake Ethan. "I've never been one to waste daylight," she replied, handing him a steaming cup. "And I thought you might appreciate a hot breakfast before heading out." Daniel couldn't remember the last time he'd had coffee this good, or the last time someone had risen early to make it for him. Mary had been dead for 8 years now, and the sharp pain of her loss had gradually dulled to a persistent ache that flared up at unexpected moments, like now, watching another woman move through the cabin in the pale pre-dawn light. "I appreciate it," he said simply, unsure how to express gratitude for such a small yet significant kindness. As he prepared to leave, Clara handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For midday," she explained. "It's just cornbread and some dried apple, but it's better than nothing." Daniel nodded, surprised again. It had been months since he'd taken food with him to the claim, usually working straight through until he returned home, hunger gnawing at him. "Ethan mentioned you're looking for gold," Clara said, her voice careful, as if approaching a sensitive topic. Are you finding much?" Daniel hesitated. His pride wanted to lie, to pretend they weren't one bad month away from losing everything, but something about Clara's direct gaze made pretense seem pointless. "Not enough," he admitted. "Not lately. But the spring melt brings new deposits. Things could change any day." Clara nodded, accepting his answer without judgment. "I hope today brings you luck, Mr. Wilson." The walk to Rushing Creek felt different somehow, the weight of the food bundle in his pocket, a tangible reminder that someone was waiting for his return. At the claim, Daniel worked with renewed energy, ignoring the pain in his leg as he dug deeper into a promising section of the creek bank. Midday, he paused to eat Clara's simple offering, savoring the sweet tang of dried apple. As he brushed crumbs from his beard, a flash of sunlight on stone caught his eye. Heart quickening, he knelt for a closer look. There, nestled in the clay soil, was a nugget of gold larger than any he'd found in months. Daniel held it up to the light, hardly daring to believe his luck. It wasn't enough to solve all their problems, but it was a start, a sign, perhaps, that their fortunes might be changing. By the time he returned to the cabin that evening, his spirits were higher than they had been in a long time. The sight that greeted him only improved his mood. Ethan sitting at the table, carefully forming letters on a slate, while Clara kneaded dough nearby. "Pa!" Ethan exclaimed, running to meet him. "Miss Clara's been teaching me my letters proper, and look what we did." He pointed proudly to the cabin, which was noticeably cleaner. The floor had been swept, the meager collection of dishes arranged neatly, and fresh pine boughs placed in a cracked jar on the table, filling the room with their scent. "We found ways to make improvements without spending a cent," Clara explained, wiping flour from her hands. Ethan was an excellent helper. Daniel reached into his pocket and produced the gold nugget. "I found this today." Clara's eyes widened. "Is that gold?" Daniel confirmed. "More than I've found in one day for a long while." "See, Miss Clara," Ethan said excitedly. "I told you Pa was going to strike it rich someday." Clara smiled. At the boy's enthusiasm. It seems you were right, Ethan. That night, as they sat around the fire after a simple but satisfying meal, Daniel found himself telling Clara about his father's journey to California during the gold rush of '49, about inheriting the claim, about his dreams of finding enough gold to secure Ethan's future. My father always said there was a fortune waiting in that creek, Daniel said, staring into the flames. He died believing it. And you? Do you believe it? Clara asked quietly. Daniel considered her question, aware of Ethan's attentive gaze. I have to, he finally replied. For Ethan's sake, I have to. Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes belief is all we have to keep us going. As the days passed, Clara quickly became an essential part of their small household. She stretched their meager supplies with ingenuity, making meals that satisfied in ways Daniel had forgotten food could. She kept the cabin in order, mended their clothes, and continued Ethan's education with patience and creativity. More surprisingly, Daniel's luck at the claim seemed to improve. Nothing spectacular, but steady finds that added up to more than he'd seen in months. It was as if Clara's presence had somehow shifted the balance of fortune in their favor. On her 5th day with them, Daniel returned to find Clara and Ethan examining rocks along the path to the cabin. Miss Clara knows about rocks, Pa, Ethan exclaimed. She says they tell stories if you know how to listen. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Clara looked slightly embarrassed. My father was interested in geology. He taught me a little about rock formations and what they might indicate about what lies beneath. She says some rocks mean there might be gold nearby, Ethan added excitedly. Daniel's interest was piqued, despite his skepticism. And what do these rocks tell you, Miss Bennett? Clara hesitated. I wouldn't presume to advise you, Mr. Wilson. My knowledge is limited to what my father shared in his amateur enthusiasm. I'd still like to hear it, Daniel insisted, surprising himself with his curiosity. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Clara tentatively shared what she knew about mineral indicators and geological formations that might suggest gold deposits. Daniel listened with growing interest, recognizing some patterns she described from his own observations. There's a place upriver from my claim, he said slowly. It has some of those quartz formations you mentioned. I've never worked it because it's harder to access, especially with my leg. It might be worth investigating, Clara suggested cautiously. Daniel nodded, already making plans to explore the area she'd inadvertently highlighted. As they sat in companionable silence afterward, he found himself studying her profile in the firelight. There was nothing conventionally beautiful about Clara Bennett. Her features were too strong, her manner too direct for the delicate femininity prized by men like Thomas Fletcher. But there was something compelling about her intelligence and quiet dignity. Why did you agree to marry a stranger? He asked suddenly. A woman with your capabilities could surely make her own way. Clara's hands stilled in her lap. A woman alone has limited options, Mr. Wilson, no matter how capable she might be. After my parents died, I worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a shop girl, whatever would put food on the table. But the wages were never enough to get ahead. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Mr. Fletcher's letters offered security and respect. He wrote of wanting a partner, not just a decorative wife. I thought perhaps I could build a life here. Daniel felt anger rising at Fletcher's deception. He's a fool, he said gruffly, and Pinecrest is poorer for his poor judgment. A hint of a smile touched Clara's lips. Thank you for that, Mr. Wilson, though I'm beginning to think his rejection may have been a blessing in disguise. The next day, Daniel made the difficult climb to the area Clara had inadvertently identified. His leg protested every step, but determination drove him forward. When he reached the quartz outcropping, he spent hours carefully examining the surrounding soil and creek bed. By mid-afternoon, he had found 3 small nuggets and a promising vein that disappeared into the hillside. It wasn't a mother lode, but it was more than he'd found in one day since Mary was alive. As he made his way back down the hill, his thoughts turned to Clara. In less than a week, she had transformed their home, improved Ethan's education, and now potentially led him to a better gold deposit. Her promised 1 week was almost up, and Daniel realized with a start that he didn't want her to leave. But what could he offer her? A life of hardship in a crude cabin with a crippled miner and his son. It was hardly the security she had crossed the country to find. Lost in these thoughts, Daniel didn't notice the riders approaching until they were almost upon him. Victor Holloway and his men blocked the narrow path, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them. "Well, well," Holloway said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Wilson limping home after another day of scratching in the dirt. Any luck today?" Daniel kept his expression neutral, acutely aware of the gold nuggets in his pocket. "Just the usual." Holloway studied him, suspicion evident in his gaze. "Is that so? Because word around town is you've taken in Fletcher's rejected mail-order bride. Seems an odd choice for a man who can barely feed his son." "My arrangements are none of your concern, Holloway." "Oh, but they are." Holloway leaned forward in his saddle. "Everything in Pinecrest is my concern, especially when it involves a piece of land I've set my sights on." His voice hardened. $500, Wilson. That's my final offer. Take it now, or things might get difficult for you and your unusual little family. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "The claim's not for sale, not at any price." Holloway's face darkened. "You'll regret that decision." He jerked his head at his men. "Let's go. Mr. Wilson clearly needs more time to consider his limited options." As they rode away, Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Holloway wasn't a man to make idle threats. The discovery of better gold on his claim would only increase the mine owner's determination to take it from him. With a sense of foreboding, Daniel continued his journey home, the day's triumph now overshadowed by Holloway's menacing presence. Still, the thought of returning to Clara and Ethan spurred him forward, easing the pain in his leg and the weight of worry on his shoulders. When the cabin came into view, warm light spilling from its single window, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense of coming home to more than just shelter. And that feeling, he realized, was as valuable as any gold he might find in the mountains. The promised week passed swiftly, then another. Clara's temporary arrangement with the Wilsons stretched into a second week, then a third, without either party mentioning her departure. The small cabin gradually transformed under her careful attention. Curtains fashioned from feed sacks framed the single window, herbs gathered from the surrounding woods hung drying from the rafters, and the once bare table now boasted a simple cloth that Clara had embroidered with pine tree motifs during the quiet evenings. With each passing day, the bond between Clara and young Ethan grew stronger. The boy, so quiet and withdrawn when she first arrived, now chatted excitedly about the things she taught him, not just letters and numbers, but the names of birds that visited the pine trees surrounding their cabin, which plants could be, eaten or used for medicine, and simple melodies she remembered from her childhood. His laughter, once so rare, now filled the cabin at regular intervals, bringing a warmth that no fire could match. Daniel watched this transformation with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. The claim was yielding better now that he'd followed Clara's inadvertent advice about where to look, but he still struggled with the idea of asking her to stay permanently. What kind of life could he offer a woman who had crossed the country seeking security? His leg ached with increasing frequency as he pushed himself harder each day, determined to extract every possible speck of gold from the creek. On a particularly warm morning in late spring, Clara surprised Daniel by requesting to accompany him to the claim. "Ethan has been telling me about your work," she explained, "and I'd like to understand it better. Perhaps I could help in some small way." Daniel hesitated, glancing at her practical but worn boots. "It's rough terrain, especially with the spring runoff, and the work is no place for a—" He stopped himself, realizing how his words might sound. "For a woman," Clara finished, a slight edge to her voice. "Mr. Wilson, I grew up helping my father search for mineral specimens in rougher country than this. I've seen how you favor your leg when you return in the evenings. Perhaps an extra pair of hands might lighten your burden." Ethan bounced excitedly beside them. "Can I come too, Pa? Please, I'll be careful around the creek." Daniel looked from his son's hopeful face to Clara's determined one and found himself unable to refuse either of them. "Very well," he conceded, "but you both must promise to follow my instructions exactly. The creek can be dangerous this time of year." The journey to the claim took longer with Ethan's shorter strides, but Clara kept the boy entertained with stories about the formation of mountains and how gold came to be hidden within them. Daniel found himself listening just as intently as his son, impressed by the depth of knowledge she possessed. "How did you come to learn so much about geology?" he asked, as they navigated a particularly steep section of the trail. Clara's expression softened with memory. "My father was a teacher before illness forced him to retire. He loved the natural world, rocks, plants, animals, and taught me everything he knew. After he took ill, I would read to him from scientific journals and books I borrowed from the local doctor. We couldn't afford to continue my formal education, but my father believed learning never truly ends if one remains curious." Upon reaching the claim, Daniel showed them the sluice box he had constructed, explaining how it trapped the heavier gold particles while allowing water to wash away the lighter sediment. He demonstrated the careful way he examined larger rocks for signs of embedded gold. "It's slow work," he admitted, "and not always rewarding, but when you find something—" He trailed off, remembering the thrill of his recent discoveries. To his surprise, Clara took to the work with natural aptitude. Her careful eye spotted details he might have missed, and her smaller hands proved adept at extracting promising stones from tight crevices. Even Ethan made himself useful, diligently washing smaller rocks in a pan nearby. By midday, they had collected more gold dust than Daniel typically found in a full day's work. They paused to eat the lunch Clara had packed: cornbread with dried berries and precious slices of salted pork. As they sat on sun-warmed rocks beside the creek, Daniel felt a contentment he hadn't experienced in years. The sight of Clara and Ethan with dirt-smudged faces and bright eyes stirred something in his chest that had been dormant since Mary's death. "We make a good team," Ethan declared, mouth full of cornbread. Clara smiled, wiping crumbs from the boy's chin. "Indeed we do. Your father has taught you well about patience and careful observation." Daniel felt his cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Ethan has a natural eye for detail, takes after his mother in that way. The words slipped out before he could consider them, and he braced for the familiar stab of pain that usually accompanied. "Memories of Mary. Tell me about her," Clara said gently. "Ethan mentions her sometimes, but I sense he remembers little." Daniel looked out over the rushing water, gathering his thoughts. "Mary was bright, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She could find joy in the smallest things, a wildflower growing through a crack in rock, the pattern frost makes on a window pane. She never complained about the hardships of mining life, even when we had almost nothing." He paused, swallowing hard. "She got fever after Ethan was born. It took her so fast there wasn't time to fetch the doctor from town." Ethan leaned against Clara's side, his expression solemn. Pa says I look like her. You have her eyes, Daniel confirmed, and her smile. Clara placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Then she must have been beautiful indeed. And her voice held no jealousy or discomfort, only compassion that eased rather than sharpened Daniel's grief. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Daniel rose quickly, instinctively moving to stand between his companions and the newcomers. Victor Holloway appeared around the bend, accompanied by 3 men, including Frank Miller, the town blacksmith, whose loyalty Holloway had purchased with generous payments for equipment. Holloway reined his horse to a stop, his eyebrows rising at the sight of Clara and Ethan. Well now, isn't this domestic? Turning gold mining into a family picnic, Wilson? Daniel straightened, painfully aware of his plain clothes and dirt-stained hands compared to Holloway's immaculate appearance. State your business, Holloway. We're working here. So I see. Holloway's gaze lingered on Clara, who had risen to stand beside Daniel, her chin lifted proudly despite the dirt on her dress. Miss Bennett, isn't it? I heard about your situation. Fletcher's an associate of mine. Says he had a narrow escape from a woman expecting luxury on a clerk's income. Clara's voice was cool when she replied. Mr. Fletcher and I had different understandings of what constitutes wealth, Mr. Holloway. I found that honest work and honorable company are more valuable than fine clothes or fancy houses. Something dangerous flashed in Holloway's eyes. Pretty words, but they won't keep you warm in winter or fed during lean times. He turned back to Daniel. I've come to make you one final offer, Wilson. $700 for the claim. That's more than generous, and you know it. Daniel felt Clara stiffen beside him, but kept his gaze steady on Holloway. And I've given you my final answer. The claim isn't for sale. Holloway sighed theatrically. I had hoped you might reconsider, especially with additional responsibilities. He nodded toward Clara. Very well. Have it your way. He gathered his reins. But remember, Wilson, spring floods are coming. Would be a shame if all your equipment washed away. A real shame. Nay. As Holloway and his men rode off, Ethan pressed close to Daniel's side. Pa, what did he mean about the floods? Daniel forced a reassuring smile. Nothing to worry about, son. Just Holloway trying to scare us. But he exchanged a glance with Clara that communicated his true concern. The spring melt was already causing the creek to rise, and if the weather turned warmer suddenly, as often happened in these mountains, the resulting flood could indeed destroy everything they had worked for. The trip back to the cabin was subdued, the earlier camaraderie dampened by Holloway's threats. As Ethan ran ahead to chase a butterfly, Clara spoke quietly to Daniel. He won't stop, will he? He's determined to have your claim. Daniel shook his head. Holloway believes everything has a price. He can't understand why I won't sell. And why won't you? Clara asked. $700 is a considerable sum. You could start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer for Ethan. Daniel paused, leaning briefly against a tree as pain shot through his bad leg. This land was my father's dream. He came here with nothing but believed so strongly that gold lay beneath these rocks that he worked himself to death proving it. When I inherited the claim, I swore I'd make it pay, not just for myself, but for my father's memory. He looked up at the mountains rising around them. Besides, where would we go? This is the only home Ethan has ever known. Clara's expression softened. I understand devotion to family legacy, Mr. Wilson, but sometimes honoring those we've lost means finding new ways to secure the future for those still with us. Her words lingered in Daniel's mind that evening as he watched her prepare. Their supper, moving about the small cabin with a grace that made the cramped space seem more like a home than it had in years. Ethan sat at the table, carefully drawing pictures of the creek and mountains on a slate, occasionally looking up to ask Clara how to spell a word. The scene pulled at something deep in Daniel's chest, an ache that wasn't entirely painful. It had been so long since the cabin had felt truly lived in rather than merely occupied. Clara had brought life back to their humble dwelling, filling empty corners with small touches that transformed bare necessity into comfort. Later, after Ethan had been tucked into bed, Daniel and Clara sat by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across her features as she mended one of Ethan's shirts, her nimble fingers working the needle with practiced ease. "You've been good for him," Daniel said suddenly, "for us both." Clara looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "You've given me shelter when I had nowhere else to go, Mr. Wilson. Any benefit has been mutual, I assure you." "Daniel," he corrected gently, "after all this time, I think you can call me Daniel." A smile touched her lips. "Daniel, then." He cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. "Your week has long passed, yet you've stayed on. I'm grateful, but I have to ask, what are your plans now? Have you saved enough for your ticket home?" Clara's hands stilled in her lap. "I've been considering my options. The truth is, there's little waiting for me back east. No family, few friends, and memories I'd rather not revisit." She met his gaze directly. "If my presence here continues to be useful, I would prefer to stay, at least until you feel the arrangement no longer serves your needs." Relief washed over Daniel, though he tried to hide the depth of it. "You're welcome to stay as long as you wish. Your help has been invaluable." The word felt insufficient for what Clara had brought to their lives, but it was all he could offer without revealing too much of his growing feelings. Feelings he wasn't sure he had the right to harbor, let alone express. Clara seemed to understand. What remained unspoken. Her smile deepened, reaching her eyes in a way that transformed her ordinary features into something Daniel found increasingly beautiful. "Then I shall stay, and we'll face whatever comes together." The following weeks brought a rhythm to their lives that felt both new and somehow familiar, as if they were remembering rather than creating their daily patterns. Each morning, Clara rose early to prepare breakfast before Daniel set off for the claim. Twice a week, she and Ethan would accompany him, their help increasing his productivity significantly. The small leather pouch where Daniel kept their gold grew steadily heavier. On days when they remained at the cabin, Clara expanded her efforts beyond basic housekeeping. She planted a small vegetable garden, coaxing seeds she had traded for with Martha Simmons into sprouting in the rocky mountain soil. She taught Ethan to identify edible plants in the surrounding woods and how to set simple snares for rabbits, skills her father had passed to her years ago. Their isolation was broken occasionally by visits from Martha, who brought news from town along with small luxuries she insisted on trading for wild herbs Clara gathered. Though Daniel suspected, the exchanges were far more generous than fair market value would dictate. It was during one such visit that Martha brought troubling news. "Fletcher's been spreading nasty rumors about you, Clara," she said as they shared tea at the cabin's small table. "Says you tricked him with false letters, that you represented yourself as a lady of means and refinement." Clara's expression remained composed, though a flush of color touched her cheeks. "That's absurd. My letters were entirely truthful about my circumstances." Martha nodded vigorously. "Anyone with sense knows it's nonsense. But Fletcher's been spending time at Holloway's house, and now they're both telling the same tale. Some folks are starting to believe it, I'm afraid." Daniel, who had been repairing a chair in the corner, looked up sharply. Why would Holloway involve himself in such matters? What could he gain from damaging Clara's reputation? Martha's expression grew grave. It's not just her reputation they're after, Daniel. Word is, Holloway's filing a claim with the mining office, saying your parcel was improperly registered when your father acquired it. He's trying to invalidate your ownership. Daniel's hands clenched around the piece of wood he'd been whittling. That's impossible. My father's claim is legitimate. I have the papers to prove it. Papers can be challenged, Martha said gently, especially when the challenger has money for lawyers. And, she hesitated, glancing at Clara, they're saying it's improper, a man and woman living together unwed, especially with a child present. The minister's wife is particularly vocal about it. Clara's face paled, but her voice remained steady. They're using me to attack Daniel's claim to the land. Martha reached across the table to pat her hand. I'm afraid so, dear. Holloway knows he can't buy Daniel out, so he's trying another approach, turning the town against you both, making it easier to push you out or invalidate your claim on moral grounds. After Martha left, a heavy silence filled the cabin. Daniel paced the small space, his limp more pronounced as it always was when he was agitated. Clara sat at the table, her back straight, hands folded tightly in her lap. I should leave, she said finally. My presence is causing you harm. Daniel stopped pacing, turning to face her with an expression that mingled disbelief and determination. Absolutely not. This is Holloway's doing, not yours. I won't let him drive you away. But your claim... My claim is legal and proper, Daniel interrupted. The papers are in order. Holloway can bring all the lawyers he wants. The truth will stand. Clara rose from her chair, approaching him with careful steps. And the other matter, the impropriety they're claiming? Daniel's throat tightened as she moved closer, the scent of pine and herbs that seemed to follow her everywhere, filling his senses. They have no right to judge what they don't understand. Don't they? Clara's voice was soft but insistent. I've brought scandal to your doorstep, Daniel. Ethan will suffer for it if the town turns against you. There's another solution, Daniel said, the words emerging before he could reconsider them. One that would silence the gossips and strengthen my claim to the land. Clara went very still, her eyes searching his face. What solution? Daniel took a deep breath, steeling himself. Marriage. If you were my wife, they'd have no grounds for scandal. My claim would be more secure with a family firmly established on the land. Ethan would have... He stopped, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't how he had imagined proposing, if he ever found the courage to do so. It sounded cold, practical, devoid of the feelings that had been growing in him for weeks. But Clara's expression didn't show disappointment or offense. Instead, a thoughtful consideration passed over her features. A marriage of convenience, she said, testing the words. It wouldn't have to be just convenience, Daniel replied, his voice dropping lower. These past weeks, you've become important to us, to me. I know it's not what you crossed the country hoping for, but it's better, Clara interrupted, surprising him. What I hoped for was security, respect, perhaps companionship. Thomas Fletcher offered those things in letters, but proved false in person. She took another step closer, close enough that Daniel could see the flecks of amber in her brown eyes. You've never made promises, yet you've given me all three freely, asking nothing in return. Hope surged in Daniel's chest, but he forced himself to be honest. I can't offer wealth or comfort, Clara. Just a hard life in a small cabin with an injured miner and his son. You offer something far more valuable, Clara replied. A place where I'm valued for what I can contribute, not just how I appear, or what I possess, where my knowledge is respected rather than dismissed. She smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed her face. I would be honored to become your wife, Daniel Wilson, for practical reasons and perhaps others in time. Relief and happiness flooded through Daniel so intensely he nearly reached for her, but propriety held him back. Instead, he extended his hand, which Clara took without hesitation. Her fingers, calloused from weeks of work, yet still feminine. In their strength, fit perfectly within his larger, rougher grasp. "I'll speak to the minister tomorrow," he promised. "A simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." Clara nodded, her hand still in his. "Simple suits us, I think." A small noise from the corner drew their attention. Ethan stood in the doorway to the sleeping area, his eyes wide with wonder. "Are you going to be my new ma, Miss Clara?" he asked, his voice hushed with hope. Clara knelt, opening her arms to the boy who rushed into them without hesitation. "If you'll have me, Ethan. I can never replace your mother, but I promise to care for you as if you were my own." Ethan's arms tightened around her neck. "I've been wishing for it," he whispered. "Every night when I see the first star." Daniel watched them, his throat tight with emotion. The small cabin that had once felt so empty now seemed filled to overflowing with possibility. Outside, the mountains stood unchanged. The creek continued its eternal journey downward. But within these rough-hewn walls, something had fundamentally shifted. A broken family was mending itself, forming something new and unexpected from the pieces of their separate losses. That night, as Daniel lay in his narrow bed listening to the soft sounds of Clara breathing behind the curtain that separated their sleeping areas, he felt a peace that had eluded him since Mary's death. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Holloway's threats, the town's gossip, the minister's potential reluctance. But for now, in this moment, he allowed himself to feel simply grateful. Clara, too, found sleep elusive that night. She wrote, in her journal by candlelight, her pen moving swiftly across the page, "Life takes unexpected turns, twisting paths leading to destinations we could never have imagined. When I stepped from that train to find myself abandoned and scorned, I thought my journey had ended in failure. Now I see it was merely beginning. Daniel is not what I envisioned when I dreamed of marriage. He is better, honest, hard-working, kind in ways that matter. His proposal lacks romance, but offers something far more precious, truth. We are entering this union with clear eyes, mutual respect, and no illusions. Perhaps that is a stronger foundation than passionate declarations could ever provide. And Ethan, dear, sweet Ethan, how quickly he has claimed a place in my heart. I will be a mother to him in all the ways that matter, honoring the memory of the woman who gave him life while helping him grow into the man he will become. Tomorrow begins a new chapter. Whatever challenges await, we will face them together." She closed the journal, tucking it beneath her pillow before extinguishing the candle. The darkness wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, no longer threatening, but comforting in its simple presence. Outside, an owl called to its mate, the sound echoing against the mountainside. Clara smiled into the darkness, feeling for the first time in years that she had found her own answering call. Morning broke clear and cool, the spring sun painting the mountains in hues of gold and rose. Daniel rose early, dressing in his cleanest shirt, a garment Clara had recently mended and scrubbed to a respectable state. His reflection in the small, cracked mirror showed a man transformed not by any external change, but by the determination and hope that now animated his features. Clara emerged from behind her curtain in the simple blue dress she had worn on her arrival, though she had since altered it to better fit her frame. Her hair was neatly arranged, adorned with a single wildflower Ethan had proudly presented over breakfast. "Are you certain about this?" Daniel asked softly as Ethan raced outside, to watch for Martha, who had promised to accompany them to town for the ceremony. Clara met his gaze steadily, "More certain than I've been about anything in a very long time." The trip to Pinecrest was marked by a nervous energy that kept conversation minimal. Martha joined them along the way, her normally cheerful face creased with concern as she updated them on the town's mood. Reverend Phillips is agreeable to performing the ceremony, though his wife less so, she reported. But there's talk that Holloway's lawyer arrived from Sacramento yesterday. They're planning something, Daniel. I can feel it. Daniel squeezed Clara's hand where it rested on his arm. Let them plan. We have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. The town appeared unchanged as they approached, yet Daniel felt the weight of eyes upon them as they made their way toward the small white church at the end of the main street. Whispers followed in their wake, some curious, others openly hostile. They were halfway to the church when Thomas Fletcher stepped into their path, his narrow face twisted with disdain. Well, if it isn't the mail-order bride who couldn't afford, improper gloves, now snaring herself a crippled miner. His voice carried deliberately, drawing attention from passers-by. Tell me, Miss Bennett, did you settle for Wilson because no one else would have you? Or was it the promise of gold that turned your head? Before Daniel could respond, Clara stepped forward, her expression composed but her eyes flashing. Mr. Fletcher, I thank you for your rejection. It spared me a lifetime with a man who measures worth by appearances rather than character. Now kindly step aside. My future husband and I have an appointment to keep. A ripple of surprised murmurs ran through the gathering crowd. Fletcher's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. You'll regret your choice when winter comes and you're starving in that shack up on the mountain, he spat. Better honest hunger than a feast bought with deceit, Clara replied evenly. She turned to Daniel and Ethan. Shall we continue? They had taken only a few steps when Victor Holloway emerged from the crowd, his imposing figure blocking their path. Beside him stood a thin man in an expensive suit, clutching a leather portfolio. The lawyer from Sacramento, Daniel presumed. Not so fast, Wilson, Holloway called, his voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the townsfolk. I've business with you before you enter that church. Daniel moved slightly in front of Clara and Ethan, his stance protective despite his disadvantaged leg. Whatever it is can wait until after our ceremony, Holloway. The lawyer stepped forward, adjusting his spectacles with a flourish. I'm afraid it cannot, sir. I represent Mr. Holloway in a legal matter concerning the claim you currently occupy. He extracted a document from his portfolio with theatrical precision. This writ, signed by Judge Harmon, temporarily suspends all activity on the disputed property pending investigation of ownership irregularities. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Judge Harmon has no jurisdiction here. Our mining claims are governed by federal law. Nevertheless, the lawyer continued smoothly, this document prevents you from working your claim or removing any gold or other valuable minerals until the matter is resolved. Additionally, Mr. Holloway has generously offered to purchase your cabin and surrounding acreage, separate from the mining claim, for $300. Given your circumstances, I would advise accepting this offer promptly. The implication was clear. With the claim frozen and no income from gold, Daniel would soon be desperate enough to sell everything for whatever price Holloway offered. It was a carefully laid trap designed to force his surrender through legal manipulation rather than direct confrontation. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Clara's voice rose clear and firm before he could speak. Mr. Holloway, your timing suggests not legal necessity, but deliberate interference with a personal matter. We intend to proceed with our wedding. Any business matters can be addressed afterward, through proper channels. Holloway's expression darkened. Miss Bennett, you would do well to reconsider your attachment to a man on the verge of losing everything. My offer to Wilson includes a position in my company, one that would at least keep food on your table, even if it lacks the excitement of prospecting. Daniel Wilson is not losing everything, Clara replied, lifting her chin. He has his integrity, his son's love, and my loyalty, none of which can be purchased with your money or intimidated by your legal maneuvers. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Daniel noticed several of the townspeople nodding in agreement with Clara's words. Even Frank Miller, Holloway's usual ally, looked uncomfortable with the public confrontation. Holloway sensed the shift in mood. His smile tightened as he addressed the crowd, rather than Clara directly. Loyalty is a fine sentiment, but it won't feed a child when winter comes. Wilson's claim is played out. Everyone knows it. I'm offering him a chance to walk away with something rather than nothing. The claim is not played out, Daniel said firmly, finding his voice at last. In fact, we've discovered a new vein that promises to be quite productive. It was a calculated risk, revealing this information, but he needed to counter Holloway's narrative in the minds of the townsfolk. The lawyer cleared his throat. Be that as it may, Mr. Wilson, this writ prevents you from extracting any gold until the ownership dispute is resolved, a process that could take months. Martha pushed forward through the crowd, her plump face flushed with indignation. And how convenient for you, Mr. Holloway, that these months would include the coming winter, when survival is hardest in these mountains. She turned to address their neighbors. Don't you all see what's happening here? Holloway wants Daniels. Land because he knows something we don't. Why else go to such lengths? She's right, another voice called out, Reverend Phillips, who had emerged from the church to investigate the commotion. This public ambush on a wedding day shows poor character, Mr. Holloway, regardless of legal rights. Holloway's face darkened with anger, but he maintained his composure. The timing is unfortunate, but necessary to protect legitimate business interests. The writ stands, Wilson. Consider my offer carefully. With a curt nod to his lawyer, he turned and walked away, the crowd parting before him. As the tension eased, Daniel turned to Clara, expecting to find disappointment or fear in her expression. Instead, her eyes shone with determination. Well, she said, straightening the wildflower in her hair, shall we proceed with our wedding? It seems we have even more reason to formalize our partnership without delay. Daniel blinked in surprise. You still want to go through with it, after all this? Clara's lips curved in a small, defiant smile. Did you think I would abandon you at the first sign of trouble, Daniel Wilson? I'm made of sturdier stuff than that. That she is, Martha agreed with a proud nod. Now let's get you two married before Holloway dreams up some other interruption. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, witnessed by Martha, Ethan, and a handful of townsfolk whose curiosity or support had drawn them to the church. Reverend Phillips spoke of commitment in times of hardship, of partnership through life's storms, words that resonated deeply given the confrontation they had just weathered. When Daniel slipped his mother's simple gold band onto Clara's finger, a precious heirloom he had kept safe since Mary's death, he felt a certainty that transcended the practical reasons for their union. And when Clara promised to stand by him in prosperity or poverty, in sickness and in health, her voice carried a conviction that left no doubt of her sincerity. They emerged from the church as husband and wife into the clear spring sunshine, Ethan dancing around them with uncontained joy. For a moment, the challenges awaiting them seemed distant, overwhelmed by the simple happiness of the moment. Yet, as they prepared to return to the cabin, now legally their shared home, Daniel caught sight of Holloway watching from the doorway of his office across the street. The mine owner's expression was unreadable, but the intensity of his gaze left no doubt that their battle was far from over. "What will we do now?" Clara asked quietly as they left the town behind, Ethan running ahead with Martha on the path toward home. Daniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We fight," he said simply, "for the claim, for our home, for our future, together." Clara's answering smile held all the warmth and determination he could have hoped for. "Together," she agreed. "Holloway has money and influence, but we have something stronger." "What's that?" Daniel asked. Clara squeezed his hand. "Truth, and the stubbornness to defend it no matter what comes." As they walked up the mountain path, the spring sun warm on their faces and their hearts lighter despite the threats hanging over them, Daniel found himself believing that perhaps they could indeed prevail against Holloway's machinations. With Clara by his side and Ethan's future as their motivation, they would find a way through the coming storm. The newly formed Wilson family returned to their small cabin, now transformed from a simple shelter to a true home by the bonds they had formed and the promises they had made. Whatever challenges awaited, they would face them not as separate individuals struggling alone, but as a united family, drawing strength from their connection to each other and to the land they were determined to defend. The morning after their wedding dawned bright and clear, sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window to cast golden patterns across the wooden floor. Clara stirred first, momentarily disoriented as she accustomed herself to her new sleeping arrangements. The curtain that had separated her corner from the rest of the cabin had been taken down, her narrow cot replaced by the slightly wider bed she now shared with Daniel. The change was modest yet profound, a physical manifestation of their new relationship. Daniel had been a perfect gentleman, maintaining a respectful distance throughout the night, despite the confines of their shared bed. Clara appreciated his consideration, though she found herself both relieved and oddly disappointed by it. Their marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but she could not deny the flutter in her stomach whenever he looked at her. With those serious grey eyes, she slipped quietly from the bed, careful not to wake him. Daniel needed his rest. The strain of yesterday's confrontation with Holloway had left deep lines of worry around his eyes. Ethan still slept soundly in his small bed in the corner, one arm flung above his head, his face peaceful in repose. Clara moved silently through her morning routine, stoking the fire and preparing breakfast. As she worked, she contemplated their situation with clear-eyed pragmatism. The writ blocking Daniel from working his claim presented an immediate and serious challenge. Without the income from gold, their resources would quickly dwindle. They had some savings, the leather pouch of gold dust hidden beneath a loose floorboard. But it wouldn't last indefinitely. A soft groan from the bed announced Daniel's waking. He sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair, his expression momentarily confused before his eyes found Clara and cleared with recognition and something warmer. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," she replied, feeling a new shyness she hadn't anticipated. "Husband," she added, testing the word. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming his weathered features. "Wife," he returned, the word wrapped in a sense of wonder that made Clara's cheeks warm. The spell was broken by Ethan's sudden bounce from his bed, the boy launching himself onto their larger one with exuberant energy. "Pa! Ma!" he exclaimed, the new title for Clara coming naturally to his lips. "Can we go to the claim today? I want to show Ma the special rocks we found." Daniel's expression sobered. "Not today, son. Remember the paper that man gave me yesterday? It means we can't work the claim for a while." Ethan's face fell. "But why? It's our gold." "Some people don't believe it is," Daniel explained gently. "We have to prove them wrong before we can go back." Clara brought a steaming mug of coffee to Daniel, her fingers brushing his as she passed it over. "We'll find a way," she assured them both. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're facing." After breakfast, Daniel retrieved a worn leather portfolio from a small trunk. Inside were the documents pertaining to his father's original claim, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. Clara and Daniel spent the morning poring over them, with Ethan occasionally peering over their shoulders before growing bored and retreating to his corner to play with the wooden animals Daniel had carved for him. "Your father's claim seems a perfectly legitimate," Clara said at last. Tracing the official seal on the main document, he filed all the proper notices, paid his fees, and maintained continuous occupation. What grounds could Holloway possibly have for challenging it? Daniel rubbed his forehead wearily. Legal technicalities, most likely. The original boundaries might have been described using landmarks that have changed over time. Or perhaps he's claiming my father abandoned the claim during one of his prospecting trips elsewhere. He sighed. With enough money for lawyers, a man can challenge almost anything. Clara's mind worked rapidly, considering possibilities. Is there anyone who knew your father when he first staked the claim? Someone who could testify to his continuous occupation? Daniel looked up, hope flickering briefly across his face. Old Jake Simmons, Martha's father-in-law. He and my father were friends from the beginning. Jake helped him build this cabin. The hope faded. But Jake's in poor health now, and even if he could testify, it might not be enough against Holloway's lawyers. Clara reached across the table to cover Daniel's hand with hers. We need more information about what Holloway is actually claiming, and we need to find a way to support ourselves while the claim is frozen. Her mind turned to practical matters. What skills do you have besides mining, Daniel? He looked slightly taken aback by the directness of her question. I can hunt, build things, not much call for those in town, though. And I can sow, cook, identify plants with medicinal properties, Clara continued, thinking aloud. Between us, we have abilities that could generate some income while we fight for the claim. Daniel's brow furrowed. Holloway has influence over most businesses in town. You would risk his displeasure by hiring me. Then we won't rely on the town, Clara replied decisively. The mountains themselves can provide if one knows where to look. My father taught me which roots, barks, and herbs can be used for healing. Martha mentioned the doctor in Pinecrest often lacks proper supplies. Perhaps he would be interested in medicinal plants, I could gather. A new respect dawned in Daniel's eyes. You continue to surprise me, Clara Wilson. The sound of her new name sent a pleasant warmth through Clara's chest. We will survive this, Daniel. And more than survive, we'll find a way to defeat Holloway at his own game. Their first step was to visit Martha Simmons, who had proven herself a steadfast ally. Her general store, though modest compared to establishments in larger towns, served as Pinecrest's central hub for supplies and information. Martha welcomed them warmly, ushering them into the small living quarters behind the store where they could speak privately. Her normally cheerful face grew serious as Daniel explained their situation. Holloway's been dropping hints about expansion for months, Martha confirmed, pouring them each a cup of tea. But I never thought he'd go so far as to challenge your legal claim. Do you know which judge issued the writ? Clara asked. Is he connected to Holloway? Martha nodded grimly. Judge Harmon owns shares in several mining operations around Sacramento. Word is, Holloway's been cultivating his friendship for some time. Daniel's jaw tightened. So the deck is stacked against us before we even begin. Not entirely, Martha replied. Judge Reynolds in Nevada City is known for his fairness. If you could get your case before him instead. How would we manage that? Clara asked. Martha leaned forward, lowering her voice though they were alone. My husband's cousin works as a clerk in the mining commissioner's office in Nevada City. He might be able to advise us on proper jurisdiction and procedures. Hope flickered. In Daniel's eyes, that could help, but we still need income while this plays out. Clara suggested selling medicinal herbs to the doctor. Would he be open to that? Martha's expression brightened. Dr. Bennett? Certainly. The poor man's been desperate for proper medicines since the last supply wagon was delayed by spring washouts. She turned to Clara with newfound respect. You know your herbs, then? Clara nodded. My father suffered from lung ailments. I learned which plants could ease his breathing and reduce fever. Dr. Bennett would pay well for such knowledge, Martha assured her, and my Jake could use help with repairs around the store. His rheumatism has been acting up something fierce. Would you be willing, Daniel? It's not charity, she added quickly. Noting his hesitation, Jake can barely lift a hammer these days, and the roof needs patching before the summer thunderstorms. Daniel glanced at Clara, who gave him an encouraging nod. I'd be glad to help, he agreed, though Clara sensed how difficult it was for him to accept even this indirect assistance. As they prepared to leave, Martha pressed a letter into Clara's hand. From my husband to his cousin in Nevada City. It explains your situation and asks for his guidance. The stagecoach passes through tomorrow. If you send it then, you might have a response within 2 weeks. Clara tucked the letter carefully into her pocket. Thank you, Martha, for everything. Their next stop was the small office at the edge of town, where Dr. Bennett, no relation to Clara, despite the shared surname, tended to Pinecrest's medical needs. The doctor was a harried-looking man, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose and ink stains on his fingers. He listened with increasing interest as Clara described the medicinal plants she could provide. Willow bark, feverfew, echinacea, he repeated, his eyebrows rising. Young woman, if you can supply me with even half of what you claim to know, I'd be enormously grateful. Most of my patients rely on whiskey and prayer for relief because proper medicines are so hard to come by in these mountains. I can begin gathering tomorrow, Clara promised, and I can show you how to prepare tinctures and poultices for maximum effectiveness. The doctor named a figure that made Clara's eyes widen slightly. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with what Daniel might earn helping Martha's husband, it could see them through a few weeks of legal battles. As they walked back toward the cabin, spirits lifted by their small victories, Daniel reached for Clara's hand. His fingers entwined with hers naturally, as if they had been doing this for years rather than hours. You were magnificent today, he said quietly. I've spent 2 years feeling trapped by circumstances, and in one morning, you've opened doors I didn't even know existed. Clara felt her cheeks warm at his praise. I've spent my whole life finding ways to survive difficult situations. It becomes a habit, looking for opportunities where others see only obstacles. A habit I clearly need to learn, Daniel admitted ruefully. I've been so focused on the claim, on following my father's path, that I failed to see other possibilities. They paused at the edge of town, the path toward their mountain cabin, stretching before them. Ethan ran ahead, chasing a butterfly with the boundless energy of childhood. The claim is still important, Clara assured him. It's your legacy, your future security. We won't give it up without a fight. But in the meantime, we adapt, we survive, we grow stronger. Daniel's gaze held hers, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. For a moment, Clara thought he might kiss her, their first real kiss as husband and wife. But the moment was interrupted by Ethan's excited shout as he discovered a lizard sunning itself on a rock. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm for the Wilson family. Each morning, Clara ventured into the woods, surrounding their cabin, basket in hand, gathering the plants that Dr. Bennett had enthusiastically purchased. She carefully noted each location in her journal, mapping the mountain's botanical treasures with scientific precision. Daniel divided his time between helping Jake Simmons with repairs and secretly monitoring their claim. Though the writ prevented him from extracting gold, nothing stopped him from observing the land and making plans for when they regained access. He discovered to his relief that Holloway had not yet moved to physically occupy the claim, likely waiting for full legal confirmation before investing resources. Ethan flourished under the new arrangement, dividing his time between helping Clara identify plants and accompanying Daniel on his various projects. The boy's natural curiosity made him an eager student, whether learning which berries were safe to eat or how to properly hammer a nail. Evenings in the cabin took on a new warmth. After supper, they would gather by the fire, Daniel whittling new toys for Ethan, Clara sewing or writing in her journal, Ethan practicing his letters or listening wide-eyed to stories. Sometimes Daniel would bring out his father's old fiddle and play simple tunes that filled the small space with life and joy. Their sleeping arrangement remained respectful, yet increasingly comfortable. Each night, the distance between them in the narrow bed seemed to decrease by imperceptible degrees. Clara became accustomed to the solid warmth of Daniel's presence beside her, the steady rhythm of his breathing as he slept. Occasionally, she would wake to find his arm draped protectively across her waist or her head resting naturally against his shoulder. These small intimacies remained unacknowledged in daylight, as if by mutual agreement they were allowing their physical comfort with each other to develop at its own pace, just as their emotional connection deepened with each passing day. 2 weeks after their wedding, Martha delivered a letter from her husband's cousin in Nevada City. The news was mixed. While Judge Reynolds might indeed be sympathetic to their case, transferring jurisdiction from Judge Harmon would require compelling evidence of bias or procedural irregularity. "We need to understand exactly what Holloway's claiming," Daniel said that evening as they discussed the letter. "Without that knowledge, we're fighting shadows." Clara's brow furrowed in thought. "Could we request a formal copy of his complaint? Surely that's our right as the challenged party." "It is, but it would alert Holloway that we're actively fighting back rather than simply waiting for the axe to fall," Daniel pointed out. "There might be advantage in letting him think we're defeated." Clara paced the small cabin, her mind working rapidly. "What about your father's original partner? You mentioned he went on to become a lawyer in Sacramento. Would he have insight into potential weaknesses in the claim?" Daniel looked up sharply. "Robert Cartwright. I haven't spoken to him in years, but he and my father were close once. He might help if I could reach him." "The stage to Sacramento runs twice monthly," Clara noted. "But someone would need to go in person. Letters take too long, and this requires explanation too complex for correspondence." They both fell silent, contemplating the implications. Sacramento was a 4-day journey each way, plus however long it took to locate Cartwright and secure his assistance. Daniel would need to be away for at least 2 weeks. "I can't leave you and Ethan alone for so long," Daniel said, his voice rough with concern. "Especially not with Holloway watching for any opportunity to pressure us." Clara met his gaze steadily. "We'll be fine. Martha and Jake will keep an eye on us, and the town respects our marriage enough to offer some protection." She reached across the table to take his hand. "This may be our best chance, Daniel. We need someone with legal knowledge on our side." The decision wasn't made lightly. They discussed every angle over the next few days, weighing risks against potential benefits. Finally, a letter arrived from Martha's cousin, confirming that without specific legal challenges to Holloway's claims, their options for transferring jurisdiction were limited. "I'll go," Daniel decided, his expression grim but determined. "Cartwright was fond of my father. If anyone can help us understand what we're facing, it's him." Preparations for Daniel's journey were made with practical efficiency. Clara packed food that would travel well, mended his clothing, and tucked a small leather pouch of gold dust into an inner pocket of his coat. Enough to cover expenses, but not so much as to tempt thieves. The night before his departure, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Clara and Daniel sat by the fire, the weight of their impending separation heavy between them. "You've become essential to us, you know," Daniel said quietly, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "To me." Clara's breath caught at the simple honesty of his words. "As you have to me." I thought myself resigned to a marriage of convenience with Thomas Fletcher. I never imagined. She trailed off, unsure how to express the depth of what she had found instead. Daniel turned to her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Clara, I know our marriage began as a practical arrangement, but these past weeks—" "I know," she whispered, understanding perfectly what he couldn't quite articulate. The connection between them had grown into something neither had anticipated, something precious and increasingly difficult to leave undefined. Daniel reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and cupped her cheek in his calloused hand. Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of the gesture. When their lips met, it felt both entirely new and somehow familiar, as if they had been moving toward this moment since her first day in Pinecrest. The kiss deepened, Daniel's arm slipping around her waist to draw her closer. Clara's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his worn shirt. They separated reluctantly, both slightly breathless, foreheads resting against each other. "I've wanted to do that since our wedding day," Daniel admitted with a rueful smile. "I've been hoping you would," Clara confessed, her cheeks warm with more than just the fire's heat. The tenderness of that moment carried them through the difficult parting the next morning. As the stagecoach pulled away, Ethan waving vigorously while Clara held him steady on her hip, she felt both the ache of Daniel's absence and a new certainty about their future together. Whatever Holloway had planned, he would not succeed in breaking what they had built. The first week of Daniel's absence passed without incident. Clara maintained their new routines, gathering herbs in the morning, delivering them to Dr. Bennett, tending to the small vegetable garden she had started, and continuing Ethan's education. The boy missed his father fiercely but took pride in being the man of the house while Daniel was away. Martha visited regularly, bringing supplies and news from town. "Holloway's been asking questions about when Daniel is expected back," she reported during one such visit, her expression concerned. "I told him I had no idea, which is true enough, since we don't know exactly how long it will take to find Mr. Cartwright." Clara nodded, keeping her face neutral while Ethan played nearby. "Has there been any other movement on the legal front?" "Nothing official," Martha replied. "But Fletcher's been saying ugly things about both of you at the saloon. Claims you tricked Daniel into marriage, just as you tried to trick him." Clara's hands stilled in her lap. "No one who knows us would believe such nonsense." "Of course not," Martha agreed quickly, "but newcomers and those who don't know you well, some are listening, and Holloway encourages it." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Be careful, Clara. Don't go into town alone while Daniel's away." Clara took the warning seriously, limiting her trips to Pinecrest to brief visits to Dr. Bennett's office, always with Ethan in tow. The doctor himself had become a staunch ally, impressed by Clara's knowledge and the quality of the medicinal plants she provided. "Your preparations have already saved 2 patients this week," he told her with genuine appreciation. "Mrs. Gardner's fever broke after just 1 dose of your willow bark tea, and old Mr. Peterson's joint pain is considerably reduced by that salve you showed me how to make." Such successes brought Clara satisfaction beyond the modest payment she received. Using knowledge her father had shared to ease suffering connected her to his memory in a way that felt meaningful and right. 10 days after Daniel's departure, Clara woke to the sound of rain drumming against the cabin's roof. The spring storms had arrived, sudden and fierce as they often were in the mountains. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the interior of the cabin where Ethan still slept peacefully. Clara rose quietly, adding wood to the nearly extinguished fire. The cabin felt particularly empty this morning, Daniel's absence a tangible void in the small space. She missed him with an intensity that surprised her, not just his physical presence, but the quiet conversations they shared, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the steady confidence she drew from his strength. As the rain continued to fall, Clara decided against venturing out for plants. Instead, she used the day to organize her dried herbs, creating labeled packets for Dr. Bennett and replenishing their own small supply of home remedies. Ethan helped for a while before growing restless, confined indoors by the weather. "When is Pa coming home?" he asked for perhaps the 20th time that week, his small face solemn as he pressed against the window, watching rain stream down the glass. "Soon," Clara assured him, though in truth she had no way of knowing. "The important thing is that he comes home with the information we need to save our claim." Ethan nodded, accepting this answer as he had the previous times. "Can I help sort?" "The plants?" he asked, turning from the window. Clara smiled, grateful for his resilience. "Of course, you have a good eye for the different types of leaves." They worked companionably through the morning, the repetitive task of sorting and packaging herbs, creating a peaceful rhythm, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder. Around midday, the rain slackened to a gentle patter, and Clara was considering preparing lunch when a knock at the door startled them both. Few visitors made the journey to their isolated cabin, especially in such weather. Martha always called out a greeting rather than knocking, and Daniel would simply enter his own home. Clara felt a flicker of unease as she approached the door, instinctively placing herself between it and Ethan. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite her apprehension. "Frank Miller, Ma'am," came the response. "From town. I've got an urgent message from Dr. Bennett." Clara hesitated. Frank Miller was Holloway's ally, but he was also the town blacksmith and had no particular quarrel with Daniel that she knew of. And if Dr. Bennett needed her... She opened the door cautiously, keeping one hand on the frame, to prevent it from opening fully. Frank Miller stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat and coat. Behind him, partially obscured by the weather, stood two other men Clara didn't recognize. "What's the message?" she asked, maintaining her position in the doorway. Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Bennett's been called to a difficult berth up at the Jenkins farm. He needs those fever remedies you promised him. Says there's signs of childbed fever already." Clara frowned. She had indeed promised the doctor more willowbark preparation, but something about Miller's manner struck her as odd. "I'll bring them to his office this afternoon when the rain lets up," she said, beginning to close the door. Miller's boot wedged into the opening, preventing the door from closing. "Need them now, Ma'am. Doctor was quite insistent." Alarm bells rang in Clara's mind. She glanced past Miller at the two strangers, noting their tense postures and the way they avoided meeting her gaze directly. "Ethan," she called without turning, keeping her voice calm, "fetch my raincoat from the peg. I need to go help Dr. Bennett." The boy appeared at her side, clutching not her coat, but the small revolver Daniel kept loaded on a high shelf. A shelf Clara had specifically shown Ethan how to reach in case of emergency during Daniel's absence. Miller's eyes widened at the sight of the weapon in the child's hand. "Now, Mrs. Wilson, there's no need for that. We're just delivering a message." "A false one, I think," Clara replied, her voice steady as she gently took the revolver from Ethan. "Dr. Bennett informed me yesterday that he would be visiting patients in the Eastern Valley today. He would hardly have been called to the Jenkins farm, which lies in the opposite direction." The men exchanged glances, their deception exposed. "Holloway just wants to talk to you," one of the strangers said finally. "Figured you might not agree to come willingly." "You figured correctly," Clara replied, raising the revolver slightly. "Now please remove your foot from my doorway, Mr. Miller, before I'm forced to take more drastic action." Miller hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Clara had no way of knowing if she could actually fire the weapon if necessary. She'd never used a gun before, but she kept her expression resolute, channeling every ounce of determination into her gaze. After a tense moment, Miller withdrew. His foot. "Holloway won't be pleased," he warned, backing away slowly. "He's not a man who likes being refused." Neither am I a woman who appreciates being lied to," Clara retorted. "Tell Mr. Holloway if he wishes to speak with me, he can do so openly and honorably, not through deception and attempted abduction." She closed the door firmly and slid the heavy wooden bar into place across it. Only then did she allow her hands to tremble, the revolver suddenly heavy and frightening in her grip. "You were so brave, Ma," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. Clara set the gun carefully on the table and knelt to embrace him, hiding her face in his small shoulder until she regained her composure. "You were the brave one, Ethan. You remembered exactly what to do in an emergency." She drew back to look at him solemnly. "But we need to be extra careful now. Holloway is growing impatient, and that makes him dangerous." They spent the remainder of the day in watchful silence, Clara positioning herself where she could observe both the door and the single window without being easily seen from outside. As darkness fell with no further incidents, she allowed herself to relax slightly, though she kept the revolver within reach as they prepared for bed. "Will they come back?" Ethan asked as she tucked him into his small bed. Clara brushed the hair from his forehead, wishing she could shield him from such fears. "I don't think so, not tonight. But tomorrow we'll go into town early and stay with Martha until your father returns. We'll be safer there." Ethan nodded, his eyelids growing heavy despite the day's excitement. "Pa will make them sorry they scared us," he murmured as he drifted toward sleep. "Yes," Clara agreed softly. "He will." Though, privately, she worried that Daniel's return might be exactly what Holloway was anticipating. A chance to confront him away from witnesses, perhaps with some trumped-up charge that would further delay their fight for the claim. Sleep came fitfully for Clara that night, her ears straining for any sound of approach. When she did drift off, her dreams were troubled, images of Daniel lost in a labyrinthine city, unable to find his way back to them, while shadowy figures closed in around the cabin. She woke before dawn, the cabin quiet save for Ethan's soft breathing and the gentle patter of continuing rain. Moving quietly, she packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes for each of them, her precious journal, the remaining gold dust, and Daniel's cherished documents pertaining to the claim. As first light touched the eastern sky, Clara gently woke Ethan. "We need to leave early," she explained, helping him dress quickly. "Eat this," she added, handing him a piece of bread, spread with honey, a rare treat that brightened his sleepy face. They left the cabin as the sun broke through the clouds, the rain having finally ceased during the night. Clara carried their small bag and the revolver, wrapped discreetly in a shawl. Ethan held tightly to her hand as they made their way down the muddy path toward town. They had covered perhaps half the distance when Clara heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. Her heart raced as she pulled Ethan off the path and into the shelter of a large pine tree, pressing a finger to her lips in warning. 4 riders appeared. Around the bend, Holloway himself in the lead, followed by Miller and the 2 strangers from the previous day. They were heading toward the cabin, their expressions grim and purposeful. "Where are they going, Ma?" Ethan whispered as the riders passed without noticing them. Clara's stomach clenched with sudden understanding. "To our home," she replied quietly. "I think Mr. Holloway has grown tired of waiting for legal channels." They remained hidden until the riders were well past, then continued toward town with increased urgency. Clara's mind raced, calculating their options. If Holloway was moving to physically seize the claim and cabin during Daniel's absence, they needed witnesses, people who could testify to the illegal nature of his actions. Upon reaching Pinecrest, Clara headed straight for Martha's store. The older woman took one look at their mud-splattered appearance and ushered them inside, calling for her husband to mind the shop while she led them to her private quarters. "Holloway and his men rode up to our cabin this morning," Clara explained, breathlessly once they were safely inside. "We left just in time to avoid them." Martha's face paled. "You think he means to take the property by force?" "I'm certain of it," Clara replied grimly. "He tried to lure me away yesterday with a false message about Dr. Bennett. When that failed—" "Nay, we need to get the sheriff," Martha decided, already reaching for her shawl. Clara caught her arm. "The sheriff's in Holloway's pocket. Everyone knows it. We need independent witnesses, people whose testimony would carry weight if this comes before a judge." Martha considered this, then nodded decisively. "Reverend Phillips, Dr. Bennett, the stagecoach driver who's in town today. He's from Nevada City and has no ties to Holloway. And Mrs. Jenkins, whose husband sits on the county board. If we can get them all to ride up and observe what Holloway's doing." "Yes," Clara agreed. "And we need to send word to Daniel. If Holloway is moving this boldly, something must have changed in the legal situation." Within the hour, a small party had assembled at Martha's store, the people she had suggested, plus Jake Simmons and 2 miners, who bore old grudges against Holloway for past dealings. Clara left Ethan in Martha's care, despite his protests, and joined the group for the ride back to the cabin. They approached cautiously, staying within the tree line until they could observe the situation. What they saw confirmed Clara's worst fears. Miller and the 2 strangers were loading furniture and equipment from the cabin onto a wagon, while Holloway supervised from horseback. "That's blatant theft," Reverend Phillips whispered, outrage evident in his normally gentle voice. "They have no right to remove your possessions." "It's more than theft," Dr. Bennett added grimly. "It's an attempt to establish possession of the property. In mining disputes, physical occupation can influence legal outcomes." Clara's hands tightened on her horse's reins. "Then we must stop them before they complete their task." The stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Harris, nodded firmly. Nothing like a few disinterested witnesses to spoil a land grab. Seen it before in Nevada. They urged their horses forward as a group, emerging from the trees in a formation that must have appeared more imposing than their actual numbers warranted. Holloway's head snapped up at their approach, momentary surprise giving way to calculated composure. "Mrs. Wilson," he called as if greeting an expected guest. "I've come to secure your property in your husband's absence. These woods can be dangerous for a woman and child alone." "How considerate," Clara replied, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Yet I notice you're removing our possessions rather than guarding them." Holloway's smile tightened. "Merely relocating them to safer storage in town while we sort out this unfortunate ownership dispute." Reverend Phillips urged his horse forward. "Mr. Holloway, I must remind you that taking possession of disputed property before legal resolution constitutes criminal trespass at minimum. And theft," added Harris loudly, "which I'll be happy to testify to before any judge from here too. Sacramento, having witnessed it with my own eyes." Holloway's gaze swept over the assembled group, calculation evident in his expression as he assessed the potential damage to his reputation and legal standing. Claire could almost see him weighing the immediate advantage of established possession against the longer-term risk of criminal charges and public condemnation. After a tense moment, he gestured sharply to his men. "Return the items to the cabin. It seems Mrs. Wilson has found protectors in her husband's absence." His cold gaze fixed on Clara. "But your husband can't stay away forever, and when he returns, we'll settle this matter once and for all." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, but Clara maintained her composure, sitting straight in her Saddlers Holloway and his men reluctantly replaced the furniture and tools they had begun to load. When they finally rode off, the tension in the clearing dissipated slightly, though Clara knew this was merely a temporary victory. Dr. Bennett placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You should stay in town until your husband returns, Mrs. Wilson. I have a spare room above my office that you and the boy are welcome to use." Clara nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Doctor. I think that would be wise." She looked around at the group who had come to her aid. "Thank you all. Your willingness to stand with us today means more than I can express." As they helped Clara gather essential items to take to town, each person offered words of encouragement and support. Their kindness both heartened and humbled her. These people who had been strangers weeks ago were now allies willing to risk Holloway's displeasure on her behalf. That evening, settled in Dr. Bennett's spare room with Ethan finally asleep beside her, Clara wrote in her journal, "Today, I witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. Holloway's ruthless greed contrasted with the courageous decency of those who stood with me. I find myself thinking constantly of Daniel, wishing I could somehow speed his journey home. Yet I also feel a strange pride in having faced this challenge without him, in having rallied support and protected what is ours. Perhaps this is what true partnership means. Each of us strong enough to stand alone when necessary, yet choosing to stand together whenever possible. I pray Daniel finds the answers we need in Sacramento and that he returns safely to us. Until then, I will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our home and our future." As she closed her journal, Clara gazed out the window at the stars visible above Pinecrest's scattered buildings. Somewhere out there, Daniel was making his way back to them, perhaps even now. She sent a silent wish into the night, for his safety, for his success, and for the strength they would need to face whatever challenges still awaited them. The confrontation at the cabin had marked a turning point. Holloway had shown his hand, revealing both his desperation and his willingness to step beyond legal bounds. But in doing so, he had also galvanized support for the Wilsons among the townspeople who valued justice over power. The stagecoach rattled violently as it navigated the rough mountain road, jostling its weary passengers with each bump and hole. Daniel Wilson braced himself against the wooden seat, wincing as his bad leg absorbed another shock. 13 days of travel had left him exhausted, dirty, and increasingly anxious to return home. The other passengers, a traveling salesman, and an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives, had long since given up on conversation, each retreating into private thoughts as the journey stretched on. Daniel's mind was consumed with memories of his time in Sacramento. Finding Robert Cartwright had been easier than expected. The lawyer had established a respectable practice specializing in mining claims and land disputes. What had proven more difficult was convincing him to take an interest in a case against Victor Holloway. "Holloway has powerful connections," Cartwright had warned during their initial meeting, his once ruddy face now pale from years spent in offices rather than mining camps. His mining operations supply ore to 3 separate foundries with government contracts. Those relationships give him influence that extends far beyond Pinecrest. Daniel had persisted, showing Cartwright his father's original claim documentation and explaining the situation in detail. The lawyer's interest had gradually kindled, old loyalty to Daniel's father eventually outweighing his caution. "There's something not quite right about Holloway's challenge," Cartwright had admitted, poring over copies of the legal notices. "The timing is suspicious, and these grounds for dispute are flimsy at best." He had looked up, his shrewd eyes narrowing. "What exactly is on your claim besides gold, Daniel?" The question had caught Daniel off guard. "Nothing valuable, just the usual. Pine trees, rocky soil, the creek itself." Cartwright had tapped his desk thoughtfully. Holloway isn't the type to waste resources on frivolous legal challenges. If he's this determined to acquire your land, there must be a reason beyond the visible gold deposits. That conversation had set in motion a frantic week of research. Cartwright had pulled records, consulted with geological experts, and examined recent land purchases throughout the region. What they discovered had both alarmed and energized them. A pattern of acquisitions suggesting Holloway was securing water rights throughout the watershed that included Daniel's claim. There's talk of a new hydraulic mining operation being planned, Cartwright had explained. It requires enormous volumes of water under pressure. Your claim sits at a strategic point in the creek system. Controlling it would give Holloway the final piece he needs to proceed. Armed with this knowledge and formal letters of introduction to Judge Reynolds in Nevada City, Daniel had begun the long journey home, his mind churning with plans and strategies. But underlying his tactical thinking was a deeper, more personal urgency, concern for Clara and Ethan. He had been away far longer than intended, and each passing day increased his worry about their safety in the face of Holloway's ambitions. A sharp jolt brought Daniel back to the present as the stagecoach rounded a bend, bringing Pinecrest into view in the valley below. Despite his exhaustion, Daniel felt a surge of emotion at the sight. Somewhere down there, Clara and Ethan were waiting for him, his family. The thought no longer seemed strange, but instead filled him with a sense of rightness that transcended his weariness. When the coach finally pulled into town, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Daniel climbed down stiffly, retrieving his small traveling bag from the boot. He scanned the scattered buildings, momentarily uncertain where to go. The cabin was his instinct, but something held him back, a sense that things might have changed in his absence. "Daniel Wilson, thank the Lord you're back." He turned to see Martha Simmons hurrying toward him from the direction of her store, relief evident in her round face. "Martha, what's happened? Are Clara and Ethan—" "They're safe," she assured him quickly, reaching his side. "Staying at Dr. Bennett's rooms above his office. But there's been trouble, Daniel. Holloway tried to seize your cabin 3 days ago." Daniel's hand tightened around the strap of his bag, rage surging through him. "Tell me everything." As Martha recounted the events of the past week, from the false message used to try luring Clara away to the attempted seizure of the cabin and the townspeople's intervention, Daniel's expression darkened. By the time she finished, his jaw was clenched so tightly it ached. "Take me to them," he said simply. The reunion with Clara and Ethan at Dr. Bennett's office was both joyous and emotional. Ethan flung himself at Daniel with a cry of delight, while Clara hung back momentarily, her eyes drinking in the sight of him as if assuring herself he was really there. Then she stepped forward, and Daniel enfolded her in an embrace that communicated everything words could not: relief, longing, gratitude, and the deep affection that had grown between them. "You're really here," she whispered against his shoulder, her composure finally breaking. "I've been so worried." I should never have left you alone to face Holloway," Daniel replied, his voice rough with emotion. "If anything had happened to you or Ethan—" Clara drew back slightly, meeting his gaze. "But nothing did. We managed, Daniel. And now you're home." A smile touched her lips. "Did you find what we needed in Sacramento?" Daniel nodded, suddenly remembering the documents secured in his inner pocket. "More than we expected. Cartwright believes he's uncovered Holloway's true motive for wanting our claim, and it has little to do with the gold we found." They gathered around Dr. Bennett's small kitchen table, Daniel, Clara, the doctor himself, and Martha, as Daniel spread out the papers Cartwright had provided. Ethan played contentedly in the corner, occasionally glancing up to reassure himself of his father's continued presence. "Holloway is planning a hydraulic mining operation," Daniel explained, pointing to a map of the region. It's a new technique that uses high-pressure water to blast away entire hillsides, exposing gold deposits that couldn't be reached by conventional mining. But it requires controlling vast amounts of water, and my claim includes a critical junction. In the creek system he needs. Dr. Bennett whistled softly. That explains his determination. Hydraulic operations can yield fortunes compared to traditional mining, and cause devastating damage to the land and waterways, Martha added grimly. I've heard stories from the western slopes about what those operations leave behind, nothing but mud and ruin. Clara studied the map intently, her fingers tracing the blue lines representing watercourses. So our claim is valuable not just for its gold, but for its strategic location in controlling water flow. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Cartwright believes that's why Holloway has been so aggressive and why he's willing to step outside the law. The potential profits from hydraulic mining would dwarf anything he could make simply purchasing our claim at a fair price. Does this information help our legal case? Clara asked, her practical mind focusing on their immediate needs. It does, Daniel confirmed. Cartwright has written to Judge Reynolds in Nevada City, arguing that Holloway's challenge should be evaluated in the context of these larger plans. Plans he's deliberately concealed from the court and the mining commission. He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope. This contains a formal request to transfer jurisdiction from Judge Harmon to Judge Reynolds, based on evidence of Holloway's undisclosed interests and potential bias in Harmon's court. Dr. Bennett cleared his throat. This is all well and good, Wilson, but what's to stop Holloway from taking more direct action while the legal process unfolds? He's already shown his willingness to use force. That's why we need to return to the cabin immediately, Daniel replied. Establish our presence and defend our property. Hollow cannot claim abandonment if we're physically occupying the land. Clara's hand found his across the table, her grip firm and supportive. When do we leave? Daniel glanced out the window at the darkening sky. First light tomorrow. Tonight we need rest and preparation. After the others had left, Clara prepared a simple meal from supplies Dr. Bennett had provided. They ate quietly, Ethan nodding off at the table despite his excitement over Daniel's return. As Clara carried the sleepy child to the small cot in the corner, Daniel watched them with a fullness in his heart that seemed inconceivable just months ago. When she returned to the table, Clara's expression was serious. What aren't you telling me, Daniel? I can see there's something more weighing on you. He smiled faintly, not surprised by her perceptiveness. In just weeks, she had learned to read him better than people who had known him for years. Cartwright warned me that Holloway might have another plan already in motion. He's been inquiring about water rights throughout the county, possibly laying groundwork to argue that my claim infringes on broader public interests. Clara considered this thoughtfully. So, even if we win the immediate battle over ownership, he might find another legal avenue to control the water. Exactly, which means we need more than just legal defense. We need leverage. Daniel hesitated, then continued carefully. There's something else Cartwright discovered. The land adjacent to our claim, currently unclaimed, shows geological signs similar to areas where significant gold deposits have been found. Clara's eyes widened with understanding. If we could stake a claim on that land as well, we could potentially control enough of the watershed to block Holloway's plans entirely, Daniel finished, or at least force him to negotiate fairly rather than trying to bulldoze us. But we'd need to file the claim in the proper office, with the necessary fees, Clara noted, her mind working rapidly, and Holloway would surely challenge it immediately. Daniel nodded, which is why I brought claim paperwork with me. If we can document our intent to expand our mining operation and file it before Holloway realizes what we're doing, we might gain the upper hand. Clara leaned forward, her expression determined. Tell me what you need me to do. before dawn. The next morning, the Wilson family prepared to leave Dr. Bennett's hospitality and return to their cabin. The doctor provided them with additional supplies and a small vial of medicine for Daniel's leg, which was still stiff and painful from the long journey. "Apply this salve morning and night," he instructed, handing the container to Clara. "And try to avoid overexertion, though I suspect that advice will be ignored given your circumstances." Clara thanked him warmly, adding the medicine to their packed supplies. "Your kindness will not be forgotten, Doctor. When this is resolved, I hope to continue our work with medicinal plants." "I shall look forward to it, Mrs. Wilson," the doctor replied with genuine affection. "Your knowledge has already benefited many of my patients." Their departure was quiet, the town still sleeping as they made their way toward the trail leading up to their mountain home. Daniel had arranged for horses from the livery, a significant expense but necessary given the distance and his physical condition. Ethan rode with Clara, his excitement at returning home momentarily overcoming his sleepiness. The journey took longer than usual, Daniel setting a careful pace to conserve their strength for whatever might await them. As they rounded the final bend in the trail, the small cabin came into view, looking eerily undisturbed in the morning light. "Appears untouched," Daniel commented, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of Holloway's men. "But we should approach cautiously." Clara nodded, one arm secure around Ethan. "I see no smoke from the chimney, and the door is still barred as we left it." They approached slowly, Daniel dismounting first to check for any traps or signs of tampering. Finding none, he removed the heavy wooden bar and pushed the door open, the familiar creak of its hinges strangely comforting after his long absence. Inside, the cabin was exactly as Clara and Ethan had left it. Their few belongings in place, cold ashes in the hearth, Clara's dried herbs still hanging from the rafters. The normality of the scene was almost disorienting after the drama of recent days. "Home," Ethan sighed happily, running to his small bed in the corner and retrieving a wooden toy horse Daniel had carved for him. "My things are still here." Clara moved more cautiously, examining the space with careful attention. "Nothing seems disturbed, but we should check the hiding place." Daniel nodded, kneeling with some difficulty to pry up the loose floorboard where they kept their modest savings and important documents. The leather pouch was still there, its contents intact. Holloway either didn't find it or was interrupted before he could search thoroughly. As Clara began rekindling the fire and setting the cabin to rights, Daniel stepped back outside to make a more thorough examination of their property. The small vegetable garden Clara had started showed signs of neglect but could be salvaged. Their few chickens had escaped their pen but were scratching nearby, apparently having survived on their own. Most importantly, there was no sign of any claim markers or other indications that Holloway had attempted to establish a competing presence during their absence. When he returned to the cabin, Clara had a pot of coffee brewing over the rekindled fire, its rich aroma filling the small space. "All seems well outside," he reported, accepting a steaming mug gratefully. "But I don't trust this quiet. Holloway isn't the type to give up so easily." "I agree," Clara replied, sitting beside him at the table while Ethan arranged his toys. By the hearth, "What's our next step?" Daniel sipped his coffee, allowing its warmth to revive his tired body. "First, we secure the cabin, repair any weaknesses, ensure we have adequate supplies and means of defense. Then tomorrow I'll ride to the adjacent land and stake our expanded claim." "Not alone," Clara said firmly. "Holloway might have men watching the trails. We go together as a family or not at all." Daniel started to protest, concern for her, and Ethan's safety foremost in his mind. But the determination in Clara's eyes stopped him. She had already proven her courage and resourcefulness in his absence. He had no right to exclude her from decisions that affected their shared future. Together then, he agreed, reaching across the table to take her hand. But we'll need to be careful. The expanded claim needs to be properly documented and filed, which means one of us will need to take the paperwork to Nevada City as soon as possible. Clara nodded thoughtfully. Martha mentioned that her nephew is riding to Nevada City with mail tomorrow. He could deliver our claim papers to the proper office. Perfect, Daniel said, squeezing her hand gratefully. You think of everything. A smile touched Clara's lips. Not everything, but I'm learning to anticipate problems before they arise, a necessary skill in our current situation. They spent the remainder of the day restoring order to the cabin and surroundings. Daniel repaired the chicken pen, while Clara reorganized their supplies and prepared a proper meal. Ethan flitted between them, helping in his eager, if sometimes clumsy way, his chatter filling the cabin with life and normalcy. That evening, as darkness settled over the mountains, they sat together by the fire, the familiar comfort of their home enhanced by the new bond that had formed between them during Daniel's absence. Ethan, exhausted by the excitement of the day, fell asleep early, curled up in his bed with his wooden toys scattered around him. In the quietness that followed, Daniel and Clara found themselves drawn together, the awkwardness of their early marriage replaced by an easy intimacy that needed few words. Clara leaned against Daniel's shoulder as they watched the dancing flames, his arm around her waist in a natural, protective gesture. I missed this place, Daniel admitted softly, but mostly, I missed you both. In Sacramento, surrounded by buildings and people and noise, all I could think about was getting back to this quiet cabin and the family waiting here. Clara turned her face up to his, firelight casting warm shadows across her features. We missed you too. The cabin felt empty without you, even with Ethan's energy filling every corner. She hesitated, then added with quiet honesty, I missed your presence beside me at night. I've grown accustomed to your warmth. Daniel's arm tightened around her waist, his heart quickening at her words. Clara, when I asked you to marry me, it was for practical reasons, to secure our position, to silence gossip. But now, she prompted gently when he paused. Now, I can't imagine my life without you, he finished, his voice rough with emotion. What began as convenience has become the most precious thing in my world, next to Ethan. Clara's hand came up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tender familiarity. I feel the same, Daniel. I came to Pinecrest, seeking security, and found something far more valuable. A true partnership, a home that's more than just shelter, a family built on respect and growing affection. When their lips met, it was with a depth of feeling that transformed a simple kiss into a profound communion of spirits. Daniel drew her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, as if their bodies had been shaped for this embrace. Clara responded with equal fervor, her initial shyness giving way to the natural expression of feelings too long contained. Later, in the privacy of their shared bed, their physical union was a continuation of the emotional bond that had been growing since her arrival, tender, respectful, yet passionate in its honest expression of love. As Clara lay in his arms afterward, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart, Daniel felt a sense of completion that transcended physical satisfaction. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, not just as legal partners, but as true companions in every sense. Morning came with renewed purpose and determination. After a heartier breakfast than they had enjoyed in weeks, the family prepared for their expedition to stake the expanded claim. Daniel packed mapping tools, claim markers, and the legal documents Cartwright had prepared. Clara assembled food, water, and basic medical supplies, while Ethan proudly carried the small hammer he would use to help secure the claim markers. The adjacent land lay beyond a ridge to the north of their current claim, accessible by a faint deer trail that wound through dense pine forest. Daniel led the way, moving as quickly as his injured leg would allow, constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of Holloway's men. Clara followed with Ethan, maintaining a watchful silence, broken only by occasional whispered instructions to the boy. The journey took nearly 2 hours, the terrain growing steeper and more challenging as they approached the ridge. When they finally reached the summit, a breathtaking vista spread before them, a hidden valley nestled between towering peaks, a small tributary of their creek cutting through its center. Spring had painted the landscape in vibrant greens, wildflowers dotting the meadows that flanked the stream. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, taking in the pristine scene. Daniel nodded, appreciating the view, but his mind already calculating boundaries and potential value. According to Cartwright's information, this entire valley is unclaimed. The stream joins our creek just beyond the bend, where we've been finding the best gold deposits. So, controlling this tributary would give us leverage over the water flow, Clara concluded, quickly grasping the strategic importance. Exactly. And if Cartwright's geological assessment is correct, there may be significant gold deposits in those hillsides as well. Daniel pointed to the northwestern slope, where a distinctive outcropping of quartz caught the morning sun. That formation is very similar to the one where we found our best nuggets. They descended into the valley carefully, Daniel marking their route with small stone cairns. When they reached the stream, he unfolded Cartwright's map and the blank claim documents, placing them on a flat rock where they could all see. "We need to define the boundaries precisely," he explained to Clara and Ethan, making it a lesson for them both. "The claim will extend from this point where the stream emerges from the mountain to this junction where it meets our existing claim, and inland for 100 yards on each side." Clara studied the map intently. "This gives us control of both water sources flowing into the main creek and places us directly in the path of Holloway's planned hydraulic operation," Daniel confirmed with grim satisfaction. He would have to negotiate with us fairly or abandon his project entirely. They spent the next hour placing claim markers at each corner of the defined area, Ethan enthusiastically hammering the wooden stakes into the ground under Daniel's direction. Clara carefully documented each marker's location on the claim form, her neat handwriting filling in the required information with methodical precision. As Daniel hammered in the final stake near the stream junction, a flash of movement in the trees across the water caught his attention. He froze, hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip. "Daniel?" Clara called softly, sensing his sudden tension. "We're being watched," he replied in a low voice, not turning toward her. "Get Ethan and move slowly back toward me." Clara obeyed without question, gathering Ethan close and moving with deliberate casualness to Daniel's side. "Holloway's men?" she whispered when she reached him. Before Daniel could answer, a figure emerged from the trees. Not one of Holloway's hired hands, but a Native American man, perhaps in his 50s, his weathered face impassive as he regarded the family across the stream. Daniel relaxed slightly, but remained alert. Relations with the local tribes had been generally peaceful in recent years, but tensions could still flare, especially around issues of land use and mining activities that damaged traditional hunting grounds. The man made no threatening moves, simply standing at the edge of the trees, observing their claim staking with obvious interest. After a moment, he raised his hand in what might have been either greeting or warning, then melted back into the forest as silently as he had appeared. "Who was that, Pa?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. "A Miwok, I think," Daniel replied, still watching the spot where the man had disappeared. This valley might be part of their traditional territory. Clara's brow furrowed with concern. Does that affect our claim? Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Legally, no. The government doesn't recognize native claims unless they've been formally documented, which few have. But morally, he trailed off, troubled by the implications. We should speak with him, Clara suggested, surprising Daniel with her directness. Learn more about how this land is used. Perhaps there's a way to respect their traditions while still securing our legal position against Holloway. Daniel looked at her with renewed appreciation, where many would see only a potential obstacle or threat. Clara saw an opportunity for understanding and cooperation. You continue to amaze me, he said softly. Most would simply ignore his presence or worry he might dispute our claim. Ignoring difficult truths rarely solves problems, Clara replied simply. And we've seen enough of Holloway's approach, taking what he wants without regard for others' rights or needs. I don't want us to become like him, even in our efforts to oppose him. They completed their documentation and gathered their supplies, Daniel scanning the tree line periodically for any sign of the native observer or other watchers. They saw no one else, but the feeling of being monitored persisted as they made their way back toward their cabin. The return journey was tense, all three alert for potential ambush or interference. When they finally reached the familiar clearing surrounding their home, relief washed over them. Daniel quickly secured the claimed documents in a waterproof pouch, ready for Martha's nephew to carry to Nevada City the following day. Now we wait, he said, settling wearily into a chair by the fire, his leg throbbing from the day's exertion. If all goes well, our expanded claim will be registered before Holloway realizes what we've done. Clara gently applied the salve, Dr. Bennett had provided to Daniel's inflamed knee, her touch bringing both relief from pain and comfort from connection. And if Holloway discovers our plans before then? Daniel covered her hand with his where it rested on his knee. Then we defend what's ours by whatever means necessary. The next morning dawned with an ominous overcast sky, threatening rain by afternoon. Daniel rose early, determined to deliver their claim documents to Martha's nephew before the weather worsened. Clara prepared a hearty breakfast, her movements efficient yet tender as she tried to provide every possible comfort before his departure. I'll be back by midday, Daniel promised, securing the precious documents inside his coat. Bar the door while I'm gone, and keep the revolver close. Clara nodded, her expression calm but her eyes betraying concern. Be careful, Daniel. Holloway may have men watching the trails to town. I'll take the western path through Taylor's abandoned claim, he assured her. It's longer but less likely to be observed. Their farewell kiss was brief but intense, both acutely aware of the risks even this short separation entailed. Ethan hugged his father tightly, extracting a promise to bring back peppermint sticks if the general store had any. The ride to town was uneventful but tense, Daniel constantly scanning the surrounding forest for signs of watchers. Pinecrest was unusually quiet when he arrived, most residents having delayed their morning activities due to the threatening weather. He made his way directly to Martha's store, relieved to find her nephew already prepared for his journey to Nevada City. These must be delivered directly to the mining commissioner's office, Daniel instructed, handing over the sealed package, along with a generous payment for the service. Ask for Mr. Jenkins specifically. He's expecting these documents. The young man nodded solemnly, tucking the package securely into his saddlebags. Aunt Martha explained how important this is. I won't fail you, Mr. Wilson. With the documents safely on their way, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. One crucial step completed in their plan to outmaneuver Holloway. He was about to leave the store when Martha caught his arm, her expression unusually grave. "Daniel, there's something you should know before you head back," she said quietly, drawing him away from other customers. "Holloway called a town meeting last night at the Prospector Saloon. He's claiming your mining activities are threatening the town's water supply and has submitted a petition to the county board requesting emergency intervention." Daniel's momentary relief evaporated. "That's absurd. Our small operation has no impact on the town's water." "Of course it doesn't," Martha agreed, her round face flushed with indignation. "But Holloway brought in some engineer from Sacramento who presented drawings showing how your claim could potentially dam or divert the creek if improperly developed. It's all hogwash, designed to create public opposition to your operation while his legal challenge proceeds." Daniel cursed under his breath. How many signed his petition? Martha's expression grew more troubled. Enough. Many were his employees, or businesses that depend on his patronage, but some were ordinary folks genuinely concerned about their water. Holloway played on their fears masterfully. This new development complicated matters significantly. Even with their expanded claim proceeding through proper channels, public sentiment against them could create obstacles they hadn't anticipated. Daniel needed to counteract Holloway's narrative quickly before it gained further traction. "Where is this engineer now?" he asked, a plan already forming in his mind. "Staying at the hotel, I believe. Planning to leave on this afternoon stage to deliver the petition to the county seat." Martha studied his face knowingly. "What are you thinking, Daniel Wilson?" "That this engineer needs to see our actual operation before writing reports about its supposed dangers," Daniel replied grimly, "and perhaps meet the family whose livelihood he's threatening based on Holloway's misleading information." Martha nodded approvingly. "Go carefully. Holloway will be watching for any action he can paint as threatening or aggressive." Daniel thanked her for the warning and headed directly to the small hotel at the end of the main street. The clerk informed him that Mr. Edwards, the engineer in question, was taking his breakfast in the adjoining dining room. Perfect timing. The dining room was nearly empty, making it easy to identify the stranger. A thin man with spectacles and an air of academic precision, meticulously cutting his steak into identical small pieces. Daniel approached directly, introducing himself. Without preamble, "Mr. Edwards, I'm Daniel Wilson. I understand you've prepared a report about my mining claim without ever having seen it firsthand." The engineer looked up, startled by the direct confrontation but quickly composing himself. "Mr. Wilson, yes, I've created a theoretical assessment based on maps and information provided by Mr. Holloway." He dabbed at his mouth with a napkin, clearly uncomfortable. "Professional opinions are often rendered without direct observation when sufficient documentation exists. Except Holloway's documentation is deliberately misleading," Daniel countered, keeping his voice level despite his anger. "I'm inviting you to visit our claim today, to see for yourself the actual size and nature of our operation before you submit a report that could destroy a family's livelihood based on false premises." Edwards hesitated, glancing toward the doorway, as if expecting Holloway to appear. "I'm scheduled to depart this afternoon. The stage doesn't leave for 4 hours," Daniel pointed out. "My claim is less than an hour's ride from town, plenty of time for a professional of your standing to verify the accuracy of his own report." The subtle challenge to his professional integrity had the desired effect. Edwards straightened, pride overriding caution. "Very well, Mr. Wilson. I shall accompany you to your claim and make any necessary amendments to my assessment based on first-hand observation." Daniel arranged for horses while Edwards gathered his equipment, including surveying tools and the drawings he had presented. At the town meeting, Within 30 minutes, they were riding out of Pinecrest, dark clouds gathering overhead as they made their way up the mountain trail. The engineer remained mostly silent during the journey, occasionally noting features of the landscape in a small notebook. As they approached the Wilson cabin, Daniel felt a surge of pride at the sight of smoke rising from the chimney, Clara's neat garden, and the general air of careful stewardship that surrounded their modest home. Clara appeared in the doorway. As they dismounted, surprise evident in her expression at the sight of a stranger accompanying Daniel. Ethan peeked around her skirts, curiosity overcoming his initial wariness. "Clara, this is Mr. Edwards, an engineer who's been assessing our claim for its supposed impact on the town's water supply," Daniel explained, the irony evident in his tone. "I've invited him to see our operation firsthand before he submits his report to the county board." Understanding immediately, Clara stepped forward with composed dignity. "Welcome to our home, Mr. Edwards. I'm Clara Wilson, and this is our son, Ethan. We're always pleased to have visitors, especially those interested in the truth about our modest enterprise." Edwards appeared disconcerted by this gracious reception, clearly having expected something very different based on Holloway's characterizations. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I appreciate the opportunity to verify my preliminary findings. Perhaps you'd like some coffee before we tour the claim," Clara offered, her perfect manners a stark contrast to the crude, disruptive miners Edwards had evidently been led to expect. "The weather looks threatening, and you might appreciate something warm before venturing out again." The engineer accepted automatically, following them into the clean, orderly cabin with increasing discomfort evident in his posture. As Clara served coffee in their best cups, chipped but meticulously clean, Edwards's gaze traveled over the modest interior, taking in Ethan's small bookshelf of borrowed texts, Clara's organized herbs hanging from the rafters, and the general atmosphere of respectable poverty maintained with obvious care and pride. "You have a lovely home, Mrs. Wilson," he commented awkwardly, as if the compliment had been extracted against his will by the evidence before him. "Thank you," Clara replied. "Simply, we make the best of what we have while working toward a better future for our son." And as they drank their coffee, Daniel spread out Edward's drawings on the table, pointing out discrepancies between the engineer's theoretical assessment and the actual scale and layout of their operation. Edwards grew increasingly discomforted. As the conversation progressed, his professional integrity clearly conflicting with whatever financial arrangement had led him to produce the misleading report. "Mr. Holloway indicated that your operation was significantly larger," he admitted finally, "and that you were planning expansions that would disrupt the natural water flow." "We are expanding our claim," Daniel acknowledged frankly, "but not in a way that would affect the town's water supply. In fact, we're more concerned about protecting the watershed from the hydraulic mining operation Holloway himself is planning, a detail he apparently omitted from his discussions with you." Edward's head snapped up, genuine surprise in his expression. "Hydraulic mining in this watershed? That would have catastrophic effects on downstream water quality and availability. Are you certain?" Daniel produced copies of the documents Cartwright had assembled in Sacramento, showing the pattern of water rights acquisitions and the preliminary equipment orders that pointed unmistakably toward hydraulic operations. Edward studied them with growing alarm, his professional concern evidently genuine despite his willingness to accept Holloway's commission. "This changes everything," he muttered, almost to himself. "My report was based on entirely false premises." Only Clara refilled his coffee cup, her manner gentle but her words pointed. "Mr. Edwards, I understand you have professional obligations to those who hire you, but surely your greater obligation is to the truth of your discipline and the well-being of the communities affected by your assessments." The engineer looked up, meeting her steady gaze with visible discomfort. You're right, of course, Mrs. Wilson. I allowed myself to be misdirected. It won't be the first time a client has concealed their true intentions, but that doesn't excuse my failure to verify the basic facts independently. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Daniel moved quickly to the window, cursing under his breath at the sight of Holloway himself riding into the clearing, flanked by Frank Miller and 2 other men. It appears your employer has discovered your unauthorized field research, Daniel said grimly to Edwards, who had gone pale at the implication. Stay inside with Clara and Ethan. I'll handle this. Before Clara could protest, Daniel stepped onto the porch, closing the cabin door firmly behind him. He stood tall despite the pain in his leg, one hand resting near his holstered revolver. As the riders approached, Holloway reined his horse to a stop several yards from the cabin, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. "Edwards!" he bellowed toward the cabin. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Daniel didn't give the engineer a chance to respond. "Mr. Edwards is conducting a proper site assessment, Holloway, something he should have done before producing that fictional report you commissioned." Holloway's face contorted with fury. As he dismounted, his expensive boots hitting the dirt with unusual force. "Wilson, you're interfering with official business. Edwards is under contract to provide an expert assessment." "An expert assessment requires accurate information," Daniel replied evenly, holding his ground on the porch. "Something you deliberately failed to provide." The cabin door opened behind him, and Daniel felt Clara's presence at his side, her quiet strength bolstering his own. Edwards followed hesitantly, clutching his papers and looking increasingly uncomfortable as he found himself caught between opposing forces. "Mr. Holloway," the engineer began, his voice steadier than his expression, "there are significant discrepancies between the information you provided and what I've observed here today." Holloway's cold gaze shifted to Edwards. "Your job is to produce the report as discussed, not conduct unauthorized investigations at the invitation of the very man whose operation we're challenging. E.g., my job is to provide accurate professional assessments," Edwards countered, straightening slightly as if drawing on some long-dormant reservoir of integrity. "The Wilson operation is a fraction of the size you described, with minimal impact on water flow. Furthermore, these documents," he held up the papers Daniel had shown him, "suggest that you yourself are planning a hydraulic mining operation that would cause far greater disruption to the watershed." A tense silence followed this declaration. Miller and the other men exchanged uncertain glances, clearly surprised by this revelation. Holloway's expression hardened into something dangerous and calculating. "Those documents prove nothing," he snapped, "and your contract with me prevents you from making any public statements without my approval." "It doesn't prevent him from testifying under oath if subpoenaed," Clara interjected, her voice clear and steady, "which he most certainly will be when our petition reaches Judge Reynolds in Nevada City." Holloway's head snapped toward her, genuine shock momentarily displacing his anger. "Reynolds? What business does a Nevada City judge have with a Pinecrest? Mining dispute?" Daniel smiled grimly, savoring this rare moment of having caught Holloway off guard. "Judge Harmon has been asked to recuse himself due to his financial interests in mining operations connected to yours. Our petition for transfer of jurisdiction was filed this morning." This was stretching the truth somewhat. The petition was still en route with Martha's nephew, but the effect on Holloway was immediate and satisfying. The mine owner's carefully constructed plan was unraveling before his eyes, and for perhaps the first time in their confrontation, uncertainty flickered across his face. "You're bluffing," he said finally, though with less conviction than before. "Reynolds has no authority here." "He does when questions of judicial bias arise," Daniel countered. Something my father's old partner, Robert Cartwright, was quite clear about when he prepared our petition. The mention of Cartwright, a lawyer whose reputation had grown considerably since his early days as a miner, visibly unsettled Holloway further. His gaze darted between Daniel, Clara, and Edwards, reassessing the situation with the calculating precision that had made him wealthy. "This changes nothing," he declared finally, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Your claim still infringes on water access essential to the town's future development. The county board will recognize that regardless of which judge hears the case. The county board might feel differently when they learn that the essential development you've been promoting is actually a hydraulic mining operation that would devastate downstream farmland," Clara replied. "Particularly since several board members own that farmland." Holloway's expression darkened further, his hand moving unconsciously toward the pistol at his hip. The tension in the clearing ratcheted higher as Daniel shifted slightly, positioning himself more fully in front of Clara despite her small sound of protest. The standoff might have escalated further if not for the unexpected intervention of a small, clear voice from the cabin doorway. "You're the man who wants to take our home," Ethan stated matter-of-factly, having slipped outside despite Clara's instructions to stay inside. He stood small but straight-backed, his young face solemn as he addressed Holloway directly. "My pa says you think gold is more important than people." The simple declaration, delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, created a strange pause in the confrontation. Holloway stared at the boy, momentarily derailed by this direct challenge from such an unexpected quarter. "Your father is mistaken," he replied stiffly. "Business is about progress, not sentiment." Ethan considered this with serious concentration. "Miss Martha says business should help people, not hurt them. Are you helping people by taking our home?" The question hung in the air, its childish clarity cutting through the adult complexities of legal maneuvering and financial calculation. Several of Holloway's men shifted uncomfortably, the human reality of their employer's ambitions suddenly personified in the small boy before them. Holloway himself seemed temporarily at a loss, unaccustomed to confronting the direct moral implications of his business strategies. His usual tactics of intimidation and legal manipulation fell flat against a child's straightforward ethical challenge. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders, a larger group than Holloway's, judging by the drumming of hooves. All heads turned as Reverend Phillips appeared around the bend in the trail, accompanied by Dr. Bennett, Martha, and Jake Simmons, and at least a dozen other townspeople. "Seems we arrived just in time," Martha called out, her normally cheerful face set in unusual determination. "When we saw Holloway and his men heading up here, we thought you might appreciate some witnesses, Daniel." The gathering crowd of townspeople shifted the balance of power dramatically. Holloway's physical threats became untenable in the face of so many potential witnesses, including several of Pinecrest's most respected citizens. "This is a private business matter," Holloway snapped, glaring at the newcomers. "It doesn't concern any of you." "A threat to our town's water concerns. All of us," Reverend Phillips replied calmly, dismounting with the others. "Which is why we've come to hear Mr. Edwards' professional assessment directly, rather than through selective quotation at your meeting last night." Edwards straightened, looking simultaneously terrified and relieved at this unexpected opportunity. With a final apologetic glance at Holloway, he turned to address the assembled townspeople. "Based on my observations today, I must correct several misstatements in my preliminary report," he began, his professional demeanor returning as he focused on technical facts rather than the tense human drama surrounding him. "The Wilson mining operation is small-scale and has minimal impact on water flow or quality. Furthermore, there is documentary evidence suggesting that a proposed hydraulic mining operation," he glanced meaningfully at Holloway, would pose far greater risks to the watershed serving Pinecrest. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Dr. Bennett stepped forward, his usual mild manner replaced by unexpected assertiveness. "Are you saying Holloway misled the town about the Wilsons' impact on our water while concealing his own plans for hydraulic mining? The very technique that's caused devastating flooding and contamination in other communities." Edwards nodded, his professional reputation now firmly attached to the truth rather than Holloway's version of it. "That appears to be the case, yes." The tide of public opinion shifted palpably. Townspeople who had signed Holloway's petition based on concerns for their water supply now directed accusatory glares at the mine owner. Frank Miller, sensing the change, edged his horse away from Holloway's side, literally and figuratively distancing himself from his longtime ally. Holloway, however, was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. His expression hardened into cold calculation as he surveyed the scene, clearly reassessing his options. "This changes nothing legally," he declared, addressing the crowd with the practiced authority that had served him well in past disputes. "Emotional appeals and unverified accusations don't alter legitimate business interests. My lawyers will pursue this matter through proper channels." "As will we," Daniel replied steadily, "with the truth fully documented and witnessed by our neighbors." For a long moment, Holloway held Daniel's gaze, the two men locked in silent acknowledgement of a battle that had shifted but not ended. Then, with a curt nod that contained neither concession nor threat, merely a tactical retreat, he remounted his horse. "This isn't over, Wilson," he said quietly, pitched for Daniel's ears alone. "Not by a long measure." "On that, we agree," Daniel responded with equal quietness. "But when it does end, it won't be as you planned." Without another word, Holloway wheeled his horse and rode away, his remaining men following after uncertain glances at the assembled townspeople. The departure lacked the triumphant finality of stories where villains are thoroughly vanquished, but it represented something perhaps more realistic, a critical shift in a long-running power struggle. As the dust settled, Clara's hand found Daniel's, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that communicated more than words could express. Ethan pressed against their legs, the family instinctively drawing together in the aftermath of crisis. Martha approached first, her round face beaming with satisfaction. "Well, that was quite a performance, Edwards," she said to the engineer, who still stood clutching his papers like shields. "I suspect Mr. Holloway won't be renewing your contract." Edwards managed a weak smile. "I suspect not, ma'am, though I find I'm less troubled by that prospect than I would have been this morning." Reverend Phillips moved forward, addressing the gathered townspeople. "I believe we've witnessed something important today, not just the exposure of deception, but a community coming together to protect its own. The Wilsons may have stood alone against Holloway's pressure until now, but that ends today." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Dr. Bennett added his own thoughts. "Clara's knowledge of medicinal plants has already benefited many patients in Pinecrest. Their contribution to our community extends beyond this dispute over mining rights." The impromptu gathering gradually transformed into something approaching a celebration. Martha produced a basket of food she had brought just in case, while Jake Simmons shared a flask of whiskey with the men. The Wilson cabin, so recently under threat, became the center of community solidarity. Its small porch and clearing filled with neighbors who had finally recognized the value of standing together against intimidation. As the afternoon progressed, Daniel found a moment to speak privately with Edwards, who was preparing to return to town with Reverend Phillips. "What will you do now?" Daniel asked. "Holloway won't forgive your change of allegiance." The engineer adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully, Return to Sacramento, I suppose. Perhaps seek employment with firms more concerned with accurate assessments than predetermined conclusions. He hesitated, then added, I owe you and Mrs. Wilson an apology. Mr. Wilson, I allowed myself to be used as a tool against innocent people. Daniel nodded, accepting the apology without need for further discussion. Your testimony may prove crucial when this matter reaches Judge Reynolds. Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement? I would, Edwards agreed firmly. It's the least I can do to correct the damage my report might have caused. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the impromptu gathering dispersed, townspeople returning to Pinecrest with promises of continued support. Martha was the last to leave, embracing Clara warmly before mounting her horse. This isn't over, she warned, echoing Holloway's earlier statement, but with friendly concern rather than menace. He'll find another approach, another angle of attack. We know, Clara acknowledged, but today has changed the balance. He can no longer operate in shadows and whispers, not with the town watching. When the final visitors had departed, the Wilson family stood together on their porch, watching. The golden light of sunset transformed their modest clearing into something approaching magical. Ethan, exhausted by the day's drama, leaned against Daniel's side, while Clara's head rested naturally on his shoulder. Do you think we've won? She asked softly, her practical nature never allowing her to embrace false hope. Daniel considered the question honestly. Not completely. Holloway has resources and influence beyond Pinecrest. The legal battle may continue for months. He paused, his arm tightening around her waist. But we've changed the terms of engagement. And that's a victory worth celebrating. Clara nodded, understanding the nuanced reality of their situation. I never imagined when I stepped off that train that my life would take such a turn. From abandoned bride to defender of a mining claim, all in the space of a few months. Do you regret it? Daniel asked, the question containing all his lingering insecurities about what he could offer compared to the life she might have had. Clara turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset and something deeper, something that had grown steadily between them since that first day at the train station. Not for a moment, she replied with quiet certainty. Thomas Fletcher's rejection led me to something far more valuable than the comfortable life he promised. A true partnership, a family built on respect and growing love, a place where my strengths are valued rather than dismissed. Daniel's throat tightened with emotion as he drew her closer. You saved us, Clara, not just from Holloway, but from the emptiness that had settled over this cabin before you arrived. Their kiss, witnessed only by a sleepy Ethan and the surrounding pines, sealed a bond forged through shared challenges and growing affection. The gold that had drawn so many to these mountains, Holloway included, seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the treasure they had found in each other. Later that evening, with Ethan tucked into bed and the cabin secure for the night, Clara and Daniel sat by the fire, planning their next steps in the ongoing struggle for their land and livelihood. The expanded claim documentation was on its way to Nevada City. Edwards's revised assessment would undermine Holloway's petition to the county board, and the townspeople had been awakened to the true nature of the conflict. Small victories, perhaps, but significant in their cumulative effect. As Clara updated her journal with the day's events, her final entry captured the essence of their journey. Today marked not an ending, but a turning point. The path ahead remains uncertain, but we no longer walk it alone. What began as a marriage of convenience, an arrangement born of necessity and practicality, has transformed into something I never dared hope for after being abandoned at that train station. A true marriage of hearts and minds, of complementary strengths and shared purpose. I came to Pinecrest seeking security and found instead a different kind of wealth, one measured not in gold dust, but in trust, respect, and love. Whatever challenges await us, we will face them together, Daniel, Ethan, and I, a family forged, not by conventional beginnings, but by the choices we've made and the bonds we've built. Perhaps that is the truest measure of worth after all. As she closed the journal, Daniel reached for her hand. The simple contact communicating everything. Words could not. Gratitude, admiration, love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their ongoing battle with Holloway. But tonight, in the warmth of their small cabin, with Ethan sleeping peacefully nearby, they had everything that truly mattered. The mail-order bride who had been rejected, for being too poor, had found a richness of spirit, purpose, and connection that no amount of gold could ever match. And the injured miner, who had offered shelter out of reluctant kindness, had received in return a partner whose true worth transcended all material measure. Together, they had discovered that real wealth lies not in what one possesses, but in whom one loves and the principles for which one stands. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.